The graph should have failed at the 4th hour. It did not fail. Oren Vesio watched the recovery index climb past the ceiling his own hand had drawn on the wall chart 11 cycles ago, and for the length of one slow breath he did nothing at all. The number was not supposed to exist. He had certified it himself as impossible. Above the reclamation cradle, the holographic weave of the subject's rebuilt frame turned in the air, every replaced structure glowing the pale green of a body that had accepted what was done to it, and the green was spreading faster than the machines could log. "Read it again," he said. Teth read it again. The apprentice's voice came out thin. "Same value, master, higher now." "It is still climbing." Oren set 2 of his 4 hands flat on the cradle's rim to feel the vibration of the pumps, the way he had been taught when he was younger than Teth, and the instruments could not be trusted. The pumps were steady. The instruments could be trusted. That was the problem. The subject on the cradle was small. They were always small, the ones the Directorate sent up from the attrition worlds, but this one was smaller than most, a young female of the Deathworld species, taken off a stripped salvage hull 3 tiers down and marked for the vessel program before Oren had ever seen her face. Her name was on the intake slate. He had made a point, in the early cycles, of not reading it. A reconstructor who learned the name of the frame he was rebuilding did poor work, or slow work, and the Directorate did not pay for either. He read it now, Cass Rourke. He wished at once that he had not. "The lattice has fully seeded," Teth said, pointing a trembling digit at the display. "In every quadrant, master, the schedule allotted 40 cycles for that. It has been 9. I can count. The Overseer will want to know." "The Overseer will want to know when I decide he should." Oren straightened. 4 eyes, arranged in the soft diamond his people wore, moved across the readouts one by one, and each one told him the same story in a different dialect. The rebuilt frame was not merely accepting the work, it was improving on it. Where he had laid a synthetic weave to carry load the original tissue could not, the original tissue had grown into and around and through the weave, and then it had begun to make more of itself, denser than the specification, as if it had read his intentions and decided they were insufficiently ambitious. He had rebuilt her from the ground up. That was the contract. The Directorate did not send him patients. It sent him material and a target profile, and it expected the material to arrive at the profile. Reconstruct the frame to field durable tolerance. Seat the lattice. Bring the recovery index to a stable ceiling and hold it there, so the vessel could be conditioned, cataloged, and deployed as the program's first proof that a Deathworlder could be taken apart and reassembled into something the Directorate owned. He had done the taking apart. He was, everyone agreed, the finest reconstructor the Academy had produced in a generation, the youngest ever certified to hold a cradle alone, which was said with admiration by those who liked him, and with a warning by those who did not. He had done the work cleanly, and now the material was refusing to hold at the ceiling. It was going straight through it. "Bring the index down," he said. "Sedate the regenerative response. We stabilize, then we report." Teth's digits danced across the cradle's controls. The apprentice was good, nervous, but good. The suppressants went in. Oren watched the green weave in the air, waiting for it to dim. It brightened. He had seen a frame reject a graft. He had seen a frame die on the cradle in a dozen quiet ways, each one a small failure he carried afterward like a stone in the pocket. He had never seen a frame take a suppressant meant to slow its healing and use it somehow, as though the chemical were one more insult to be metabolized and turned to fuel. The recovery index did not fall. It found a new gear. "Master," Teth whispered, "what do I do?" "Nothing," Oren said. "You do nothing, so do I. We watch." They watched. On the cradle, Cass Rourke's chest rose and fell under the field that held her in the deep place below dreaming, and every time it fell, some machine somewhere revised its estimate of what she was. 3 levels down, in a chamber the Directorate called the ward and the technicians called the pit, The girl was waking, and it was not going the way the manual said either. Prelate Vun watched through the glass with the patience of a creature who had never in a long, comfortable life been made to hurry. Vun was of the old slate-purple lineages, tall and unhurried, the kind of official who wore rank the way other people wore skin, without thinking about it, unable to take it off. He had signed the vessel program into existence. He intended to sign his name across its success, and he did not intend to share the ink. "She is early," Vun said. The conditioning officer beside him, a hard blue chitinous thing named Cask, whose cast did the program's unpleasant middle work, consulted a slate. 9 cycles early to consciousness. The reconstructor has not filed a variance. No, he has not. Vun's 4 fingers folded together. The reconstructor is young and proud and thinks silence is the same as control. Note it. Behind the glass, Cass Rourke opened her eyes. She did not thrash. That was the first wrong thing. The subjects always thrashed, woke into a body that was no longer the body they had gone under with, felt the weight of the new frame and screamed against the restraints until the field put them back down. Vun had watched it 40 times. It was, he would have admitted only to himself, the part he liked. The moment the material understood it was material. The girl did not scream. She lay still and let her eyes move across the ceiling, then the walls, then the restraints on her wrists, then the glass, then Vun's face behind the glass. Her expression did not change. She looked at him the way a surveyor looks at a plot of ground, measuring, filing, deciding nothing yet. "She is assessing the room," Cask said, and there was something in the chitinous voice that had not been there a moment before. "She is a captured salvage hand from a burned world," Vun said. "She is assessing nothing. She is stunned." Cass Rourke turned her wrist inside the restraint. The field flared to hold it. She turned it again, testing the give, then stopped, having learned what she needed to learn, and lay back, and closed her eyes as though she had decided this was a good time to rest, and the room's opinion did not enter into it. Cask looked at the slate, looked at the glass. "Prelate," he said carefully, "her vitals under the field, they are not the vitals of a stunned subject." "Then adjust the field." "I have twice." Cask set the slate down. "She is slowing her own heart to stay under it. She is helping us hold her, so that she can learn how the holding works." For the first time in a long, comfortable life, Prelate Vun felt something at the back of his long neck that he could not immediately name. He named it, after a moment, and disliked the name, and put it away where he kept things he intended to deny. "Sedate her fully," he said. "Send my compliments to the reconstructor and tell him his subject is awake ahead of schedule, and I would like to know why. Politely, for now." Oren got the message on his personal slate and read it twice and did not answer it. He had gone up to the observation gallery to be alone with the numbers, which was the only place on the station where he could think without Teth watching his face for instructions. The gallery ran along the rim of the reclamation ward's outer hull, and beyond the long window the station's slow rotation carried the view around. The great banded curve of the gas world the station orbited, lit gold on its day side, and the wide bright field of its ring light throwing pale illumination across everything. The Directorate had built the reclamation station here for the isolation and the ring light both, power for the cradles, and no world close enough to run to. He watched the gold curve turn and thought about the recovery index. He had built his reputation on a single principle, drilled into him by an instructor he had loved and disappointed in equal measure. Know the ceiling. Every frame has a ceiling. Every body of every species has a limit past which it cannot heal, cannot adapt, cannot be pushed, and the reconstructor's art is to work the frame right up to that ceiling and then respect it, because the ceiling is the only honest thing in the room. Ambition kills more patience than error. Know the ceiling. He had known the ceiling for the Deathworld species. He had it in a table. Every reconstructor did a modest, sensible number, arrived at by the Academy through the usual means, which was to say by taking apart the ones who died in intake and measuring what was left. The Deathworlders were durable. Everyone knew that. It was in the classification. It was the reason the vessel program existed at all. A species that evolved on an attrition world learned to survive its own planet or it did not persist, and Cass Rourke's planet had persisted so many species of predator that the Directorate's surveyors had given it a designation Orin had, until recently, assumed was hyperbole. Not a class number. A word. On the intake slate, the origin world was tagged Grismark, the old survey cant for a world that eats its own catalog faster than the catalog can be written. A Grismark world. The surveyors did not hand out that tag for durability. They handed it out for spite. Durable was in the table. This was not in the table. This was a frame that took a ceiling and treated it as a floor. His slate chimed again, the prelate less polite this time. Orin closed his 4 eyes and reopened them and made himself think like a reconstructor, and not like a young man who had done something he did not understand. There were 2 possibilities. The first was that his work was flawed, that he had, in his pride, laid a lattice that ran away with the frame, a technical error he would have to confess and correct. That possibility frightened him because it touched his reputation. The second possibility frightened him for a different reason, and he turned it over slowly, the way a person turns over a stone they suspect has something living underneath. The second possibility was that his work was perfect, and the frame was doing this on its own. That the Deathworld body, handed a lattice meant to make it merely feel durable, had taken the lattice as a suggestion and run past it under its own power. That the ceiling in his table was not the species ceiling at all, but only the highest number the Academy had ever managed to measure before its subjects died on the intake table and stopped supplying data. That no one had ever seen the real ceiling because no one had ever kept one of these alive and whole long enough to find it. That he was the first. That the number climbing on his wall was not a mistake. It was a measurement. The first honest measurement anyone had ever taken of what this species could become if you rebuilt it and then, by accident, gave it permission. Orin stood at the window a long time. Then he answered the prelate's message. And the answer was a lie, and it was the first lie of many, and he knew it as he sent it. Recovery nominal, he wrote, variance within tolerance, subject stable, report to follow. He deleted the word impossible from his private notes because it was no longer accurate, and he did not yet have a word to put in its place. Cass surfaced for the second time in a room with no one in it, which was the first useful thing to happen to her since the salvage hull. She lay still and did the inventory, because the inventory was the only thing that had ever kept her alive. Her mother had drilled it into her on the crew barges when she was small enough to ride in a cargo net. Before you move, you count. Count the exits. Count the hands. Count what's yours and what isn't. She had counted her way off 3 dying ships and 1 dead one, and she counted now. The body was wrong. That was the honest first line of the inventory, and she did not flinch from it. The body was wrong, heavier, quieter, differently arranged in ways she could feel but not yet name, as though someone had taken her apart in her sleep and put her back together with better parts and worse intentions. She did not panic. Panic was a hand you played when you were out of other hands, and she was not out of other hands. She flexed 1 finger at a time and found that they answered. She breathed and found that the breath went deeper and came back cleaner than she remembered a breath doing. Whatever they had done to her, they had not done it to break her. They had done it to keep her. That was worse. Broken things got left behind, kept things got used. She had been on the salvage hull's 3rd watch when the hooks came through the hull, and she remembered the cold and the noise and then a long white nothing. And now she was here, in a room that hummed, wearing a body that was hers and was not hers, and a tall purple thing had watched her through glass with an expression she had seen before on the faces of men who owned things. She had memorized that face. She memorized faces. It was another thing her mother had taught her, back when her mother had still been alive to teach her things. There was a restraint on each wrist, and a field over the whole of her that pressed like deep water. She had already learned that if she slowed down, the field relaxed, because the field was calibrated for a thrashing animal, and she was not going to give it one. She had already learned that the ceiling had a seam. She lay in the deep water press and breathed her clean new breath and waited, and while she waited she finished the inventory, and the last line of the inventory was the one that mattered. She was not dead. They had spent a great deal on making sure she was not dead. Whatever they wanted her for, they wanted her alive to want it, and a thing that must be kept alive has one advantage over the things that keep it. It is very hard to threaten. She filed that where she filed the purple face, and she waited for the door. The door, when it opened, admitted the reconstructor. Oren had not planned to go into the ward. Reconstructors did not go into the ward. That was cask's domain, the conditioning cast's ugly province, and the professional wall between the cradle and the pit was one Oren had been glad until now to keep high. But the number on his wall had not stopped climbing, and he had reached a point of needing to see the frame that produced it not as a weave of light turning in the air, but as a person in a room. Because a reconstructor who forgets the frame is a person does poor work, and he was beginning to suspect that his whole profession had been doing very poor work for a very long time. He told the ward officer he needed a post-reconstruction assessment. It was even true. He went in alone, which was against protocol, and the ward officer let him, because he was Oren Vessil and his certifications opened doors that protocol closed. She was awake. Of course she was awake. She watched him come in with those flat, level eyes, Deathworlder eyes, front set, a predator's arrangement, though he had not built them. The directorate wanted the sensory frame left original, for reasons that were catalogued elsewhere, and that he did not like to think about, and she did not speak, and he found that he did not know how to begin. "I am the one who rebuilt you," he said, which was a foolish thing to say and true. Cass Rourke looked at him for a while. Then she said, "In the trade can't they must have loaded into her language center along with everything else. I know. I can feel your handwriting." Oren went very still. "My handwriting." "That's what my mother called it, when somebody fixes a thing and you can feel how they think in the way they fixed it." She turned her rebuilt wrist inside the restraint, slow, watching him watch it. "You did careful work. You didn't like doing it. That's two things I know about you, and I've been awake for a room. 4 hands, 4 eyes, all of them for a moment useless to him. Oren had rebuilt 3 dozen Deathworlders, and none of them had ever spoken to him, as though the conversation were a thing they were conducting rather than a thing being done to them. "You are ahead of the recovery schedule," he said, retreating into the one language he trusted. "Considerably. I need to understand why." "Ask the body." "It's mostly yours now." She almost smiled. It did not reach warmth. It was the expression of someone acknowledging a shared bad joke. "You want to know why I'm healing faster than your chart? I'll tell you the truth because it costs me nothing and it'll cost you sleep. I don't know either. I've always healed fast. Everybody where I'm from heals fast, or they're not from where I'm from anymore." The almost smile went out. "You people keep measuring us on the ones who die. You're about to find out you were measuring the wrong end." Oren stood in the humming room with the number climbing 3 levels above him on a wall she could not see, and understood that she had just told him, plainly and without drama, exactly what he had worked out alone at the window and had not dared write down. "What is your purpose for me?" she said, not a question, a line item. "You spent a lot to keep me. I want to know what I'm being kept for." And Oren, who had certified impossible with his own hand, who had lied to a prelate an hour ago and would lie to him again, opened his mouth to give the approved answer. "You are a subject of the vessel program. You will be conditioned and catalogued and deployed," and found that he could not make the words come out in front of those flat, level, patient eyes. So he told her the truth instead. It was the second time in one day he had done something against every protocol he lived by, and he was beginning to notice a pattern in himself that frightened him more than the number. "They mean to make you into a thing that belongs to them," he said quietly. "A weapon they own. I was the first step. There are more steps. They will not tell you about them, and when they are done, if it works, they will do it to a great many more of your kind." He paused. "I do not think it is going to work. I think I have made a mistake they will call a success until the moment it kills them, and I do not yet know what I am going to do about that." Cass Rourke lay in the deep-water field and looked at the alien who had taken her apart and put her back together, and for the first time since the hooks came through the hull, she recalculated. Not the room, the whole board. "Well," she said, "that's the first honest thing anybody's said to me since I got here." She closed her eyes, slowing her heart to loosen the field, filing his face beside the purple one but in a different drawer. "Sit down, handwriting. Tell me the steps." He did not sit down, but he told her the steps, in the flat clinical cant he used for everything that frightened him, and she listened the way she did everything, completely, without moving, filing. Reconstruction was the first phase, he said, and it was finished. She was rebuilt. Now came conditioning, which was casks, and which was designed to teach the frame that it belonged to the program. A long sequence of controlled stresses, each one a demonstration to the subject, and to the record that the vessel would perform on command and stop on command. After conditioning came cataloging, the measurement of the finished asset against the target profile. And after cataloging, if the asset matched the profile, came deployment, which meant she would be sent somewhere the directorate wanted a death worlder pointed and made to be one. "And if I don't match the profile," Cass said. Oren was quiet. "Then the asset is decommissioned. The material is recovered." He met her eyes when he said it because she had earned that much. "You would be taken apart for what you could teach the next attempt. There is no version of this where they let you leave." "There's always a version where you leave," she said. "People just don't like the toll on it." She turned her wrist in the field again, slow, thoughtful. "Conditioning. What's it do?" "It hurts you," he said simply, "in ways that are measured so that a caste who enjoys measuring can write that you obeyed. It stops short of damage the program can't afford." "That is the theory." "And in practice?" "In practice," Oren said, "I do not think it is going to find your ceiling, and I think that is going to make Cask angry, and I think Cask angry is more dangerous to you than Cask methodical." He picked up the assessment slate he had brought as a prop and did not look at it. "The conditioning Cask believes pain is a language every frame understands. They have never conditioned a frame that could out-heal the lesson. When they find out yours can, they will not conclude that the theory is wrong. They will conclude that they have not spoken loudly enough." Cass Rourke lay still for a long moment. "How long have I got before it starts?" "A cycle, perhaps two." "The prelate is impatient, and I have already spent my delay lying to him about you." "Why?" she said. It was the second time she had used the word as a scalpel, and this time it went all the way in. Why would the reconstructor, the youngest ever certified, the directorate's own hand, lie to a prelate to buy a salvage hand 2 cycles she had not asked for? Oren looked at the number he could not see through 3 levels of hull and gave her the only answer he had. "Because I made you," he said, "and I would like, for once in my career, to find out what I have made before someone I answer to destroys it to keep it from embarrassing them." "That's not a kindness," Cass said. "That's curiosity." "No," Oren agreed, "it is not a kindness. But it is on your side of the room for now, and you are short on things that are." He turned to go. At the door he stopped without knowing he was going to. "They will begin with cold," he said. "It is always cold first with your kind because the record says cold is where you break. Do not let them see the seam you found in the field. Let them think they are close. A frightened caste is careful. A confident one gets sloppy, and sloppy is the only door in this room." He left before she could answer, and did not sleep that cycle, and the number on his wall climbed while he lay awake and stopped being a mistake in his mind and became, somewhere in the dark, a thing he was quietly, treasonously proud of. Cask began with cold, because the record said cold was where they broke. The conditioning chamber was a bright, clean, terrible room, lit like all directorate rooms in the flat cyan of the day panels, because the directorate believed, as an article of administrative faith, that nothing done under bright light could be shameful. Cask stood at the console in the observation alcove and watched the subject through the inner glass and felt the pleasant, orderly anticipation of a professional about to do a thing he was good at. The chitinous cast did not hate the subjects. That was a sentiment reconstructors projected onto them because reconstructors were soft. Cask did not hate Cass' work any more than a mason hates a stone. He simply intended to teach her where she stopped, and he had a schedule. The cold came down. He watched the subject's frame register it, the involuntary tightening, the breath going short, the body doing what bodies did. He watched the recovery telemetry the reconstructor had insisted be piped to the conditioning console, a courtesy Cask had accepted and privately dismissed, and for the first several units the telemetry told the ordinary story. Stress in, distress out, the number sliding down toward the place where a subject decided that obedience was cheaper than more of this. Then the number stopped sliding, then it turned around. Cask watched the Deathworld frame take the cold and hold it and begin. There was no other word for it in his cast's precise and pitiless vocabulary, begin to keep up. The distress markers that should have deepened toward the break instead leveled and steadied, as though the frame had finished the ugly first work of arguing with the cold and had now simply decided to be a thing that was cold and continue being it indefinitely. The subject's eyes were open. She was looking at the glass. She was looking, Cask realized with a slow crawl along the seams of his carapace, at him. He deepened the cold. Protocol permitted it. The frame took the deeper cold the way it had taken the first, argued with it, steadied, kept up. The telemetry the soft reconstructor had insisted on showed the recovery index, the number that was not supposed to move during conditioning at all, ticking upward, unhurried, like a merchant tallying a good day. "Officer," said his own apprentice at the secondary console, a young hard-cast conditioner named S. Sin who had never seen a conditioning go wrong because they never went wrong. "Officer, the subject's core reading. She's not fighting it anymore. She's just cold and fine." "No one is just cold and fine," Cask said. "She is." Cask looked at the subject through the glass. The subject looked back. She was shivering. She let him see the shiver, and only much later would he understand that the shiver had been a gift, a performance, the seam she had chosen to show him, and behind the shiver her flat front-set eyes held his without any of the pleading the record had promised. She was not breaking. She was pricing him. She was working out, at her leisure, exactly how much this room could do, and how much of it she would have to pretend to feel to keep him spending his schedule on a wall. Cask was of a caste that did the program's unpleasant middle work and had made a life of not flinching from it. He ended the cold, logged the session as inconclusive, subject non-compliant, recommend escalation, and stood a long time in the bright, clean room after the subject had been returned to the ward, and did something he had not done in 40 conditionings. He read the reconstructor's telemetry again, all of it from the start. And when he got to the end of it, to the number that had gone up while he tried to bring it down, he understood that the soft, young reconstructor had known. Had piped the telemetry to Cask's own console not as a courtesy but as a record, so that, when this went the way it had just gone, there would be no way for anyone to say later that they had not been warned. Cask did not like being made part of another creature's record. He filed his own report, and in it, he wrote a sentence that would, in time, help end several careers and start one legend, though he wrote it only to protect himself. The reconstruction has produced an asset the conditioning protocol cannot bound. Recommend the prelate be advised the ceiling assumptions are void. Then he requested escalation to the next tier of the protocol, because he was a professional, and the schedule was the schedule, and no stone had ever failed to break under enough of the right pressure. He had simply, he told himself, not yet applied enough. Prelate Vun read Kask's report and the reconstructor's telemetry side by side, and understood two things, and disliked both. The first was that the vessel program had, in its very first subject, produced exactly the result its founding proposal had promised. A Deathworlder rebuilt into something durable past all prior measure, and had done so 9 cycles ahead of schedule, which should have been the triumph of Vun's long career. The second was that the result did not obey, and a weapon that does not obey is not an asset. It is a loose object of great mass moving at speed inside your own hull. Vun sat in his tall chair in his bright office with the ring light coming gold through the dome, and did the arithmetic that officials of his lineage had always done, which was the arithmetic of ownership. A thing you owned was worth its use minus its risk. The girl's use was enormous, incalculable, the proof of concept, the first of a fleet of rebuilt Deathworlders, the founding artifact of a program with his name on it. Her risk was also enormous, and rising and located inside his station, 3 levels below his feet, slowing her own heart to game the very fields meant to hold her. He summoned the reconstructor. Orin came and stood, and Vun studied him with the unhurried attention of a creature deciding whether a subordinate was a fool, a traitor, or merely young, and finding, to his mild irritation, that he could not yet rule out any of the 3. "You filed recovery nominal," Vun said. "The conditioning officer files the ceiling assumptions are void. One of you is lying to me, reconstructor, and the telemetry says it is you." "The telemetry is mine, Prelate," Orin said. "I piped it to Kask's console myself. A liar does not hand the truth to the caste most likely to use it against him." Vun allowed himself to be fractionally impressed. "Then explain your filing." "When I filed nominal, it was nominal for the ceiling and the table. The table is wrong. Every reconstructor in the Directorate has been working from a ceiling measured off the ones who died in intake." Orin kept his 4 eyes level. "We have never before kept one of them alive and whole and unstressed long enough to see what the frame does when it is permitted to finish. This one finished, and then kept going. That is not a defect in my work, Prelate. It is the first correct measurement your program has ever produced. It simply does not say what you wanted it to say." The room was quiet. Somewhere in the dome, the ring light shifted as the station turned. "You are telling me," Vun said slowly, "that the asset performs beyond specification and cannot be conditioned, and that this is a success." "I am telling you it is a result," Orin said. "Whether it is a success depends entirely on what you decide the program was for. If it was for producing an owned weapon, then no, Prelate, I do not think you can own this. If it was for discovering what this species truly is when you stop killing it before it can show you, then your program has succeeded beyond any proposal you ever signed, and the finding is that you have been at war, in your ledgers, with a thing you have never once measured awake." Vun was silent for a long moment. Then he said, in the mild, terrible voice of a creature who has stopped being impressed and started being decisive, "Thank you, reconstructor. That will be all." And Orin, walking out, felt the door of the whole station swing shut behind him, and knew that he had just with his honesty signed the order for Cass Rourke's decommission. Because a prelate who cannot own a thing and cannot condition it, and has been told to his face that it is beyond him, has only one instrument of ownership left, and it is deletion. You cannot lose a weapon you have destroyed. It becomes, in the ledger, a controlled cost. And Vun was, before anything else, a keeper of ledgers. Teth found the master in the gallery again, at the window, watching the gold curve turn, and did not know that he was about to change his own life by asking a simple question. "Master, the prelate has convened the disposition board for the subject. They meet next cycle." The apprentice hesitated. "The order is drafted, recovery of material. It has your name on the reconstruction line for signature. As the certifying reconstructor, they require you to." "I know what they require." "You will sign it." Orin did not turn from the window. Below and around, the ring light lay bright across the hull, and 3 levels down a young female of a species his people had spent a generation quietly taking apart lay in a field she was polite enough to help hold, waiting for a door. "Teth," Orin said, "when you were certified, what did they make you swear?" The apprentice recited it because apprentices always could. To know the ceiling, to work the frame to its limit and respect the limit. To do no work the frame cannot carry. To do no work the frame cannot carry, Orin repeated. And what is the work if the frame carries everything, and the ones who hired us decide that a frame which carries everything is an embarrassment to be recovered before it is seen? He turned at last, and his 4 eyes were doing something Teth had never seen them do. "I did perfect work. That is the whole of my crime. I rebuilt her exactly to their order, and the order was ignorant, and the frame was honest. And now they will destroy the most honest thing I have ever made because it proved their ignorance in a language they cannot unhear." He looked at the drafted order glowing on Teth's slate. "No, I will not sign it. And I am going to tell you why. And then you are going to decide whether you were my apprentice or theirs, and you will have to decide quickly, because I do not think we have as long as the board thinks we have." Teth stared at him. "Master, what have you done?" "Nothing yet," Orin said. "That is the trouble. I'm about to." He took the slate from the apprentice's trembling digits and deleted the signature request, which changed nothing legally and everything otherwise. 3 levels down there is a girl who counted the exits before she opened her eyes. The board thinks it is convening to dispose of an asset. It is convening to find out what happens when you build a thing that cannot be killed, and then, in front of it, decide out loud to try. Prelate Vun went down to the ward himself, once before the board, because a prelate of his lineage did not sign a disposition on a thing he had not looked at with his own 4 eyes, and because some part of him that he did not examine wanted to see the material that had made a reconstructor lie to him. He did not go in. He stood at the glass, where he had stood the first time, and watched the young female of the Deathworld species lie in the field she was polite enough to help hold, and he waited for her to give him something he could file under ordinary. She turned her head and looked at him through the glass, and he understood that she had known he was coming before the door opened, the way she seemed to know everything before it arrived, and he disliked the understanding. "You're the one who signs it," Cass said. The ward speaker carried her voice flat and even into the observation alcove. "I can tell by how you stand. The reconstructor stands like a man reading a chart he doesn't like. The conditioner stands like a man doing a job. You stand like a man who owns the room and came down to make sure the room knows it." She did not move. "You came to see if I'd frighten you. I won't. Frightening you would be cheap. And I've told your reconstructor, and I'll tell you, I'm not from a place where we do the cheap thing." "You are material," Vun said. "That has exceeded its specification. That is all you are. Do not mistake my thoroughness for interest." "I don't mistake anything," Cass said. "That's the whole trouble with me from where you're standing. You keep a ledger. I can see it in how you talk. Use minus risk, cost against value, the arithmetic of a man who's never once in his life had to carry a thing out of a room that was killing it." She turned her wrist in the field slow and let him watch the field flare to hold it and fail to hurt her. "You want to know what I am? I'll save you the board. I'm a line in your ledger that doesn't add up, and it's going to keep not adding up no matter which column you try to file me in, because I'm not a cost and I'm not a resource. I'm the thing your arithmetic never had a term for, and you're going to spend the rest of this program finding that out one expensive line at a time." Vun was silent behind the glass. In a long, comfortable life, he had been threatened by admirals and outmaneuvered by legalists and flattered by every rank beneath his own, and he had a response filed for each of them, a way to make the arithmetic come out. He did not have one filed for a small salvage hand in a containment field telling him, without heat, without pleading, without the smallest tremor of the fear the record promised, that she was a figure his ledger could not hold. It was not a threat. That was what unsettled him. A threat he could price. This was a measurement delivered by the thing being measured, and it was more accurate than anything his own instruments had produced. "You slowed your heart," he said at last, because it was the one thing he had seen with his own eyes that he could not explain, and a prelate did not like to leave a thing unexplained. "The first time you woke, you helped my field hold you so that you could learn how the holding worked. Why show me that? Why let me see you were doing it?" "Because a frightened owner is a careful one," Cass said, "and a confident owner gets sloppy, and I wanted you confident." She almost smiled, the shared bad joke expression that never reached warmth. "You just told me it worked. You came down here confident. You came down to file me under ordinary and go sign the paper feeling like the room was yours. Now you're standing at the glass a quarter unit longer than you meant to, doing arithmetic you don't like, and you're going to walk back up to your bright office and tell yourself you saw material and were unimpressed, and some part of you is going to lie awake on that, because you've never in your comfortable life met a figure that didn't add up and couldn't be made to." She lay back, closing her eyes, loosening the field. "Go sign your paper, Purple. I'll still be a line that doesn't balance when you do. That's the thing about the cheap arithmetic. It only works on people who are bargaining for their own lives, and I finished bargaining for mine a long way back, on a hull you never heard of, in a net my mother carried me out in. You've got nothing to spend against a person who's already closed her own account. You just don't know it yet, but you will. You'll know it right about the time the ledger runs off the bottom of the page." Vaughn stood at the glass a moment longer, and then he turned and went up to his bright office, and he told himself he had seen material and been unimpressed, and he signed nothing that cycle, which he attributed to thoroughness, and did not attribute to the small, cold voice that had priced him more accurately than any instrument on his station. He would sign the disposition later at the board, with the ledger's certainty restored. But he lay awake first, exactly as she had said he would, doing arithmetic that would not come out, and in the long, unhurried dark of his lineage's composure, he felt again the thing at the back of his long neck that he had named once and put away, and he took it out and looked at it, and its name was "This figure does not balance," and he put it away again, and it did not stay put, and it would never again stay put for the rest of his long, comfortable life. The second conditioning was heat, because when cold failed the record said try its opposite, and Cass had known it would be heat before Cask did, because she had listened when the handwriting told her the cast got sloppy when it was confident and predictable when it was afraid. She let them see her sweat. She let them see the frame labor. She gave the bright, clean room a performance of a body reaching its limit, and behind the performance she did the inventory, and the inventory said the heat was nowhere near the thing the new frame could carry, and that the new frame was, if anything, enjoying the exercise the way a cold engine enjoys finally being run. That was the part she did not tell the handwriting when he came to the ward between sessions under the cover of assessment, that the body he had built was not merely surviving what they did to it. It was getting better at it. Every stress they put through her, the frame answered, and then it kept a little of the answer, so that the next stress met a wall the last one had raised. She was not enduring the conditioning. She was being tempered by it. Cask was, with enormous care and a full schedule, forging the very thing he was trying to break. She kept that to herself because she had learned, off 4 dying ships, that the most dangerous thing you can do is let the room know your good news early. "They will move to the sustained protocols next," Orrin told her, low in the humming ward, his 4 eyes doing their nervous circuit of the readouts. "Cask has requested the disposition board. He has recommended you be catalogued as unconditionable and recovered. The board meets, and then there is no more conditioning. There is only the recovery order." "Recovery," Cass said. "That's the polite one for taking me apart." "Yes." "Went 2 cycles. Perhaps less." Orrin set down the assessment slate he no longer bothered to pretend to read. "Cass, I have not signed the order. That buys you nothing legally. They will find a reconstructor who will or waive the requirement or wait for me to be removed and sign it themselves. But it means that when they act, They act around me, not through me, and a prelate who has to act around his own certifying reconstructor is a prelate spending attention he would rather spend elsewhere. He paused. It is the only card I had, and I have played it. I do not have another. You've got two, Cass said. You just don't like the look of the second one. He waited. You've got the truth, she said, and you've got me. Those are the two cards. And you're a careful man who spent his whole life respecting the ceiling, and now you've found a thing with no ceiling and it scares you worse than the prelate does, because the prelate you understand. She held his eyes. You want to know what I'm going to do. You're afraid I'm going to be the loose object of great mass the purple one thinks I am. Come apart, take the station with me, prove him right in the last second of everybody's life. The thought, Oren admitted, has cost me sleep. Then hear me once so you can sleep. Cass slowed her heart, loosened the field, and said the thing she had decided in the deep water dark, the thing that was the whole of her and the whole of where she was from, and the whole reason the surveyors handed out a word instead of a number. I'm not going to take the station. I'm not angry. Anger's a hand you play when you're out of hands, and I have got, thanks to you, a very great many hands. I'm going to do the thing my mother did on the barges when the big crews came for our salvage, and there were too many of them to fight. I'm going to be so much more trouble to kill than I'm worth that killing me stops being the cheap option. And then I'm going to walk out, and I'm going to take anyone who wants to come, and I'm going to leave the rest of them alive to explain to their ledgers why the cost line for one salvage hand ran off the bottom of the page. Oren stared at her. That is not a plan. That is a temperament. Where I'm from, Cass said, that's the same thing. She almost smiled, that shared bad joke expression that never reached warmth. You measured us on the ones who die handwriting. You keep saying it like it's a fact about your instrument. It's a fact about us. The ones who die are the ones who thought fighting was the point. The point was never the fight. The point was the toll. Make yourself expensive. Stay alive through the invoice. Walk out when they can't afford you anymore. She lay back. Your prelate keeps a ledger. Good, I'm going to write in it. Sin, the young hard-cast conditioner at the secondary console, was the one who noticed the pattern, and noticing it was the beginning of the end of Sin's belief in the record. Sin had been raised on the record the way all the conditioning cast were, the accumulated, pitiless wisdom of 40 conditionings, the tables of where each species broke, the comfortable certainty that pain was a language every frame understood. Sin had watched the cold fail and the heat fail, and had assumed, with the cast's bone-deep confidence, that failure meant the room simply had not spoken loudly enough. Officer Kask assumed the same. It was what the record taught. But Sin ran the secondary console, and the secondary console logged the recovery telemetry, and Sin was young enough to still look at numbers instead of only at conclusions. And the numbers said a thing the record had no page for. The subject was getting stronger. Not enduring, not resisting. Getting stronger, session over session, in a slow, steady climb that mapped exactly onto the conditioning schedule. Every stress Kask applied, the recovery index answered, and then held a little of the answer. Sin plotted it one quiet shift, alone in the alcove, and stared at the plot for a long time, because the plot was not the plot of a subject being conditioned. It was the plot of a subject being trained. They were not breaking her toward the profile. They were building her past it, with their own hands on schedule at cost. Sin took the plot to Kask, because that was protocol, and because Sin was frightened. Kask looked at the plot a long time. His cast did not show much, but Sin had worked beside him long enough to read the set of the seams along his thorax, and the seams said the officer had already known, and had already decided not to know it out loud. You will not file this, Kask said. Officer, you will not file this, because if you file this, the board reads it, and the board is a room of officials who have staked careers on the vessel program, and officials who have staked careers do not respond well to being handed proof that their program's success and their program's disaster are the same event. Kask set the plot down. The board is going to order recovery. That order rests on the finding that the asset is unconditionable. Your plot says something worse, that the asset is not merely unconditionable but self-amplifying, that every hand we lay on her makes her more of what we cannot hold. If the board understood that, it would not order recovery as sin. It would order a great deal more than recovery, and it would order it in a panic, and panic in a room of officials with a station full of witnesses is how stations become case studies. He looked at his apprentice with something that in a softer cast might have been pity. I am protecting you. File the inconclusive report. Let the board believe recovery solves it. Let the recovery be someone else's hands. S-Sin filed the inconclusive report, but S-Sin kept the plot. And S-Sin began, in the quiet of the alcove, to do the thing the cast was raised never to do, to wonder whether the record was wisdom or merely the shape of 40 prior failures, dressed up as knowledge because no one had survived long enough to correct it. S-Sin was young. That was the thing the record never accounted for. The record was written by those who lived. The young were the ones who read it and sometimes noticed the handwriting of the dead. The disposition board convened in the bright chamber under the dome, and Prelate Vun presided, and it went exactly as Vun intended, which was the last thing about it that went as anyone intended. There were 5 at the table: Vun, Kask for the conditioning cast, a cataloging official whose whole life was the measurement of assets against profiles, a directorate legalist to keep the ledger of the ledger, and, required by protocol and present under protest, the certifying reconstructor, Oren Vessil, who had not signed the order and would not, and who sat at the far end of the table like a witness at his own trial. Vun opened it cleanly. The asset designated Vessel 1 was unconditionable. The recommendation before the board was recovery of material and closure of the deployment track, with the reconstruction data retained for a second attempt under revised assumptions. He invited the record. The cataloging official read the profile match. The asset exceeded the target durability profile in every axis measured. The official's voice, trained to flatness, developed a thin crack as the numbers went on, because the numbers were not the numbers of a subject exceeding a profile. They were the numbers of an instrument that had run off the end of its own scale, so that the official was reduced to reporting not values but the failure of the measuring equipment to contain the values. The asset's durability index, the official finished, cannot be stated. Our instruments do not extend far enough to state it. We can only confirm it exceeds every ceiling in the reconstruction table. By a margin our tables were not built to express. Silence under the dome. The ring light turned gold across the table. Then the recommendation stands, Vun said, and is strengthened. An asset we cannot measure is an asset we cannot own. Recovery. Prelate, it was Oren. He had promised himself he would be procedural. He kept the promise. Procedure was the only weapon that worked in this room. The board is asked to order the destruction of the single most valuable finding in the program's history on the grounds that it is too valuable to keep. I would like that contradiction entered into the record, because someone above this board is going to read the record someday, and I would like them to see that the reconstructor named it. Noted, Vun said, in the voice that meant and buried. Reconstructor, you have declined to certify the recovery order. Your objection is noted. Your signature is not required. The board waives it under emergency disposition. Is there a procedural obstacle you wish to raise, or are you merely uncomfortable? And here Oren played the truth because it was the only card that could not be waived. One obstacle, Prelate. The recovery of a self-amplifying frame has never been performed because no such frame has ever existed. The recovery protocols in your legalist's ledger were written for ordinary subjects' frames that can be shut down, taken apart, recovered. They assume a subject that can be killed by the standard means. This one cannot. He let it sit. I built her. I know what she carries. If this board orders recovery by the standard protocols, this board is ordering its own recovery team into a room with a thing those protocols cannot stop, and calling it routine on the strength of tables I am telling you, as the reconstructor who wrote the entries are void. I will not certify that. Not to protect the asset. To protect the crew you are about to send in ignorant. The legalist stirred. Is the reconstructor asserting the recovery cannot be safely performed? I am asserting, Oren said, that no one at this table knows whether it can because the thing you are recovering is, by your own cataloging official's testimony, off the end of every scale you own. You are voting to open a door and you have not measured what is behind it. My whole profession is built on one oath to respect the ceiling. This board is about to vote to ignore a ceiling it cannot even find. I decline to join it, and I have put my reason in the record. It was, Kask thought, watching from his seat with his cast stillness, an extraordinary thing to watch, the soft young reconstructor turning procedure into a blade, not to save the subject which the board would never allow, but to make the board own what it was about to do. Kask said nothing. Kask had a plot in his private files that agreed with every word, and Kask intended to survive this board. And survival, Kask had long ago decided, meant letting officials walk into rooms he had warned them about in language quiet enough to deny later. Vun looked down the table at the reconstructor for a long, unhurried moment. Your objection is noted, reconstructor, and overruled, he said. The board finds the asset unconditionable and orders recovery under emergency disposition, standard protocols to be carried out this cycle. The reconstructor is relieved of access to the ward effective now for the security of the operation. He turned his slate face down, which was how his lineage ended things. Officer Kask will assemble the recovery team. Thank you all. And that was the moment. Oren would think of it for the rest of his life. That prelate Vun, keeper of ledgers, master of the arithmetic of ownership, made the single error that his whole careful life had been arranged to prevent. He heard a warning he could not measure, and because he could not measure it, he decided it was not real. He mistook the edge of his instruments for the edge of the world. They came for Cass in the 8th unit of the cycle, and she had been ready since the 6th, because Sin had told her. That was the thing none of them accounted for, not Vun with his ledgers, not Kask with his record. They accounted for the subject's frame. They did not account for the fact that the subject had spent every session she was not being conditioned, doing the one thing her mother had taught her before anything else, reading the room, reading the hands in it, finding the one hand that was starting to doubt. And on the secondary console, session over session, there had been a young, hard-cast conditioner who looked at numbers instead of conclusions, and whose seams had begun to show the strain of knowing something the officer had ordered not known. Cass had never spoken to Sin. She had not needed to. She had simply, in the last heat session, when the field was down and the room thought her spent, met the young conditioner's eyes through the inner glass and shown Sin the plot, not on any console, but in the plain fact of her own steady breathing, the body that should have been broken and was instead resting. She had let Sin see that she knew. And she had let Sin see that she was not angry, which was the thing that undid Sin completely, because the record had a page for a subject that raged, and no page at all for a subject that had done the arithmetic, and forgiven you for the answer in advance. Sin had come to the ward in the 7th unit on a false errand and had said without preamble in a voice pitched under the hum, "They come next unit. Standard recovery. Officer will send 4 with the field cannons and the disassembly cradle. He warned the board it wouldn't hold you. They overruled him. And then, because Sin was young and had just decided something enormous, the reconstructor is locked out of the ward. But the ward's inner locks answer to the reconstruction console, and the reconstruction console does not know the board relieved him because the board did the paperwork and forgot the wiring. Sin had set a data shard on the edge of the cradle. This opens the ward from the inside. I do not know why I am giving it to you. Yes, I do. I read the record every day. It is a book of everyone who was sure. I would like once to be one of the ones who wasn't. Cass had taken the shard. "What's your name?" she'd said. Sin. Sin, Cass had repeated, filing it in the drawer she kept for the ones who came back for you. When this goes the way it's going to go, you get behind me, not because I'll protect you. Because the ones behind me get to say later that they chose the side that walked out. So when they came for her in the 8th unit, 4 of them, in the hard armor of the recovery cast, with the field cannons up and the disassembly cradle humming on its lift behind them, and Kask's voice on the ward speaker reciting the disposition order in the flat cant of a creature covering himself for the record. Cass Rourke was already sitting up on the edge of the reconstruction cradle, in a body with no ceiling, with a shard in her fist and the whole toll worked out in advance. She did not stand angry. She stood the way she did everything. She counted the exits and the hands and what was hers and what wasn't, and then she looked at the 4 armored shapes filling the only door, and said, in the trade cant they had loaded into her along with everything else, the first line of the invoice. You should have listened to the reconstructor. The recovery cast were the best armored soldiers on the station, and the record said the best armor solved everything. And the record, as Sin had begun to suspect and Kask had already concluded, was a book of everyone who had been sure. Kask did not attack them. That was the first thing that broke the recovery leader's calm. The subject stood up off the cradle in the bright, humming ward, unrestrained. In a body they had been briefed could not be conditioned. And she did not lunge, did not scream, did not do a single thing the disassembly protocol had a countermeasure for. She simply moved toward the door they were blocking, unhurried, as if the 4 of them and their field cannons were a queue she intended to join. The leader put a cannon on her and fired the shutdown pulse, the field charge that dropped an ordinary frame into the deep place below dreaming so the disassembly cradle could take it. It was calibrated for a death worlder. Kask had set the calibration himself from the table. The pulse hit her and she stopped, and the room held its breath, and then she took another step. The pulse had gone into the body Oren built, and the body had done to it what the body did to everything now, argued with it, steadied, kept a little of the answer. She swayed once. Then the sway was gone, and so was the leader's certainty, and Cass reached out and took the cannon out of his hands the way a tired adult takes a dangerous toy from a child, without heat, and set it down on the cradle behind her, out of the game. That was your best one, she told him, not unkindly. You've got 3 more men, and none of them have a better idea than the man whose idea just failed. I want you to think about that while you decide what happens next, because I'm going to give you a choice your officer didn't give you. She looked at the 4 of them, one at a time, filing the faces. You can spend the next unit finding out, very expensively, that you cannot recover me. Or you can put the cradle back on the lift, walk your men out that door, and log that the subject was non-cooperative and the recovery was suspended pending review. One of those ends with you explaining injuries to a medic. The other ends with paperwork. I've read your kind. You'd rather have paperwork. The leader was not a coward. His caste did not make cowards. But his caste made professionals, and a professional whose single tool has just failed against a target he was told could not resist is a professional recalculating fast. And the recalculation the leader arrived at was that the reconstructor's warning at the board, which every soldier on the station had heard about within the unit, because stations leak, had been correct, and the officials who overruled it were 3 levels up and safe. And he was down here in the room with the thing they had refused to measure. He gave the order to fire all 4. They fired all 4. The ward filled with the flat percussion of shutdown pulses meant to drop a whole squad of ordinary frames, and Cass Rourke walked into it. She did not shrug it off. Oren, watching later on the ward's own record, would note that she felt every pulse, that the body labored, that there was a cost, and she paid it in the only currency the frame accepted, which was to take the damage and turn it, and keep a little of the answer. She crossed the ward through a storm designed to end anything that lived, and when she reached the 4 of them she did not hurt them. She took their cannons. All 4, one after another, faster each time as the frame learned the shape of the motion, and she stacked them on the cradle, and then she took the disassembly cradle's control key off the leader's belt and put it in her own fist, and stood among 4 of the Directorate's best soldiers, unarmed, in a body they could not shut down, and said, "There it is. That's the toll. 4 cannons, 1 cradle, and every one of you alive to tell your officer the recovery cost more than the asset and delivered nothing. Now get behind the line or get out." S-in the door. And S-in, who had come in behind the recovery team on the false errand of monitoring telemetry, opened the ward from the inside with a shard the board had forgotten to account for, and the young conditioner and the 4 professionals who had just learned the record was a book of the dead all made. In that instant, the same quiet arithmetic, and it did not come out on the prelate's side. Prelate Vun learned that the recovery had failed from a status line on his slate that said, in the flat cant of the disposition protocol, recovery suspended, subject uncontained, ward breached, no fatalities, and he read the phrase "no fatalities" 3 times before he understood that it was the most frightening line in the report. An asset that killed the recovery team would have been a weapon, dangerous, but comprehensible, a thing that fit the arithmetic of ownership, because a weapon that kills can be outmassed, outnumbered, destroyed by sufficient force. An asset that walked through the recovery team and declined to kill anyone was not a weapon. It was a decision. It was a thing that had looked at his soldiers and chosen, from a position of total advantage, to let them live. And a thing that chooses is a thing with a will, and a will you cannot condition and cannot measure and cannot own, is the one object in the universe Prelate Vun's whole philosophy had no line for. He did the thing his lineage did when the small instruments failed. He reached for the large ones. "Seal the ward level," he told the station master in the mild voice that had never once been raised in a long, comfortable life. "All bulkheads, withdraw atmosphere from the ward level and the 2 levels above it. Cold cycle the sealed volume to hull temperature." He folded his 4 fingers. "The reconstructor testified she cannot be shut down by the standard means. Very well, we will not shut her down. We will remove the ship around her. No air, no heat, no power to the cradles. Whatever she is still a frame, and a frame in vacuum at hull cold is a problem the station itself solves, without a single soldier in the room. Log it as environmental containment. It is cheaper than recovery, and it cannot be resisted." The station master hesitated. "Prelate. Level containment vents 3 levels. There are personnel. Withdraw the personnel who can be withdrawn in the time available. Log the rest as operational losses of the containment action." Vun turned his slate face down. "The asset has already cost me a recovery team's confidence and a board's certainty. It will not cost me the station. Vent the level." The station master carried out the order, because the station master kept a ledger too, and Prelate Vun's name was at the top of it. And so the Directorate, having built the most durable thing it had ever measured and then discovered it could not own it, moved to the last instrument in the arithmetic of ownership, which was to make the entire ledger, the level, the wards, the personnel, the physics of the station itself, into the weapon, and to call the killing an accident of containment so that no hand at the table would have to be the hand that did it. 3 levels down, the bulkhead slammed. The air began to thin. The bright cyan day panels flickered as power rerouted to the vent pumps, and for the first time the ward went dim, and cold started to climb in through the hull the way cold had climbed in through every hull Casswork had ever ridden. Oren felt the bulkhead slam through the deck of his quarters, where the board had confined him, and knew what it meant before the station-wide notice scrolled across his slate, because he had spent his whole career learning what the Directorate did when its small instruments failed. Environmental containment in progress. Levels 9 through 11 sealed. All personnel evacuate above level 12. He did not evacuate, he went the other way. He would try, in the cycles after, to explain to himself why the youngest reconstructor ever certified, a careful man who had spent his life respecting ceilings, walked toward a level the station was actively turning into vacuum. The best he could ever do was this, that he had made a thing, and the thing was honest, and the directorate had decided that honesty was a defect to be vented into the dark, and that somewhere in the long chain of small compromises that had made up his obedient life, he had finally reached the one he could not sign, not to save her. He was not sure even then that she needed saving. The number on his wall suggested otherwise. He went because he did not want to be. In the record someone would read someday, a reconstructor who had known and stayed in his quarters. Teth met him in the service corridor, which surprised him, and S-Sin was with the apprentice, which surprised him more. And behind S-Sin were the 4 soldiers of the failed recovery team, out of their armor now and carrying it, which stopped him entirely. "Master," Teth said, "the ward is venting." She sent the conditioner up through the service ducts with a message. She said, the apprentice's voice caught. She said to tell the handwriting that the body he built is holding, but that the personnel on the vented levels are not built the way she is, and that she is not going to walk out of a room she left full of your dead. She said you would understand what she meant. I do not understand what she means. Oren understood exactly what she meant, and it undid something in him that the board and the prelate together had not been able to touch. She was not asking to be rescued. She was, from inside a room the station was killing, refusing to let it kill anyone else, refusing to make her survival cost the low-caste technicians and the trapped ward staff who had no frame like hers to argue with the cold. She had done the arithmetic Vun refused to do, the arithmetic of who the containment action actually killed, and she had decided, from a position of total advantage, that she would not accept a survival paid for in other people's air. "The vent pumps," Oren said. "They run off the reclamation power trunk. The same trunk that feeds the cradles." He looked at S-Sin. "The reconstruction console still holds ward authority. The board relieved me on paper and forgot the wiring. If we reach the console, we can stall the pumps, not stop the containment, stall it, by the trapped level's air." "And then?" one of the soldiers asked, not hostile, a professional out of ideas looking for the next one. "The prelate ordered the vent. We stall it, he orders it again. He is 3 levels up and safe, and we are down here." "Then we do the thing the prelate refuses to do," Oren said. "We go up." He looked at the 4 soldiers and the young conditioner and his own trembling apprentice, and understood that he had become, without meaning to and against every protocol he had ever sworn, the reconstructor of a very different kind of body, a small, improvised, treasonous body of people who had each, privately, decided the record was a book of the dead. She is going to make herself too expensive to kill. That is her plan, and it is a good one, and it will work, because I built her and I know it will work. But it only saves her. Someone has to make the rest of us too expensive to vent. That is not a frame problem. That is a paperwork problem, and paperwork," he almost smiled, his people's soft version of the girl's shared bad joke expression, "is a thing even a reconstructor can learn to weaponize. S-Sin, the console. The rest of you, we are going to the bridge, and we are going to arrive as witnesses, and the prelate is going to discover that the one thing his arithmetic never priced is a room full of people who have stopped being afraid of the ledger." Cass stood in the dimming ward as the air thinned and the cold came in, and did the inventory, and the inventory was the worst it had ever been, and she did not panic, because she had never once in her life had the luxury. The body held. That was the top line, and she trusted it, because the handwriting had told her to, and because the frame kept telling her the same thing every time the station tried to end it. Argue steady. Keep a little of the answer. The cold that would have stopped an ordinary frame's heart she took the way she had taken Cask's cold, and the thinning air the frame answered by doing more with less, and she understood, standing there, the full shape of what had been built into her by accident. Not a weapon, not a thing that killed, but a thing that simply, stubbornly, at terrible and rising cost, refused to stop. But the ward was not empty. 2 ward technicians, low caste, unarmored, had been sealed in when the bulkhead slammed. Too slow or too far to make the evacuation, and they were not built the way she was, and the cold was already in them. She had them behind the cradle, in the last warm pocket of the room, under every scrap of insulating material the ward held, and she was buying them time with her own body the only way the frame allowed, and she was watching the air quality readout fall toward the number where the 2 technicians stopped, and she was doing the math on it the way her mother had taught her, cold and clear, and without flinching. She could walk out. The frame would carry her through the vented levels, through vacuum and hull cold, to a bulkhead she could force. She was almost certain of it. She was not certain the technicians would still be alive when she came back for them, and she was entirely certain she was not going to find out, because she was not from a place where you walked out of a room and left it full of the people the room was killing. So she had sent Sin up through the ducts with a message, and now she stood in the cold with 2 strangers behind her and waited to find out whether the handwriting was the kind of man who stayed in his quarters. And while she waited, she talked to the 2 technicians in a low, steady voice about nothing at all, about the barges and the salvage and the way her mother counted the exits, because a voice in the cold was a thing you could give people even when you had run out of air to give them. And she was not going to let them die in the quiet. The air readout fell, the cold climbed. And then under the hum of the failing ward, Cass heard the vent pump stutter, stall and catch and slow, and the air readout stopped falling and hung, and she let out a breath she had been metering for a quarter unit and said to the 2 frightened technicians behind the cradle, "There, told you, he's not the kind that stays in his quarters." She almost smiled. "Now we just have to stay alive long enough to be expensive. Keep breathing, slow, like me. We're going to walk out of here, all 3 of us, and we're going to do it in front of the man who signed the order, so he has to watch the cost line run off the bottom of his page." Sin reached the reconstruction console 2 corridors ahead of the others, and did the treason quietly, the way the young conditioner did everything, and the vent pump stalled because a board that relieves a reconstructor on paper does not think to relieve his console of its wiring. It was not a heroic thing to watch. It was a hard-cast conditioner sitting at a stranger's station, hands shaking, reading unfamiliar authorities off an interface built for a different caste's work, throttling a power trunk 1 increment at a time while the station's own systems tried to route around the interference. Sin was not a saboteur. Sin was a person who had spent a career reading a book of the dead and had decided in the last unit to stop being one of its future entries. That was all the treason was. It was usually all treason ever was. "It's holding," Sin said when Oren and the others reached the console alcove. "The pumps are stalled. The vented levels are holding pressure at the floor of survivable. I can't reverse it. The containment lock is above my authority, but I can keep it here." The young conditioner looked up. "They'll notice. When they notice, they'll cut this console out of the trunk entirely, and then the pumps run again, and I can't stop it a second time." "Then we make sure that by the time they notice," Oren said, "the noticing does not help them." He turned to the 4 recovery soldiers who stood in the alcove out of their armor, holding it, having followed a reconstructor and a defecting conditioner up a service corridor for reasons none of them had yet said out loud. "You 4. The board sent you to recover an asset and the asset let you live. You have already made your choice. You made it in the ward when you did not die on principle. I am going to ask you to make it out loud, because in a quarter unit it is going to matter that you said it." He met the leader's eyes. "The prelate has ordered the station to kill her by killing the level. He has logged the personnel on that level as operational losses. 2 of those losses are ward technicians. A salvage hand is keeping alive with her own body, while she waits to see if any of us are worth her trouble. I am going up to the bridge to stop the prelate. I would like to arrive with witnesses who wore the recovery caste's armor this morning, because the one thing a prelate cannot vent is the record of his own soldiers refusing his order." The leader was quiet for a moment. Then he set his armor down on the deck, deliberately, a thing a recovery soldier did not do while an operation was live, and it was louder than any words. "My name is Dreed," he said. "I have run recoveries for 11 cycles, and I have never once been told the asset couldn't be shut down before I walked in on it." He knew. The reconstructor warned the board and they sent us in anyway, and they logged no fatalities like it was a failure. He straightened. "I'll be a witness. So will my men. We didn't sign to die making a prelate's arithmetic come out even." Prelate Vun noticed the stalled pumps within the quarter unit, because prelates of his lineage noticed everything that touched the ledger, and he traced the interference to the reconstruction console with the unhurried competence of a creature who had spent a long life finding the hand behind the problem. "The reconstructor," he said, to the empty bright office under the dome. "Of course." He did not rage. His lineage did not rage. Rage was a confession that the world had exceeded your control, and Vun intended to control this to the last increment. He simply severed the reconstruction console from the power trunk with an authority the console could not answer, and watched with grim satisfaction as the vent pumps resumed, and the air readout on the sealed level began once more to fall. Then he opened the station-wide channel, because he had decided the time for quiet instruments was ending, and he wanted the record to show that he had given every reasonable order, and that everything that followed was the fault of an asset that would not accept its own recovery. "This is the prelate," he said in the mild voice, and the whole station heard it. "An asset of the vessel program has resisted lawful recovery and induced personnel to interfere with a containment action. This is a security emergency. All personnel will comply with containment. The sealed levels will remain sealed until the containment action is complete. Any personnel found interfering will be logged as accessory to the asset's resistance and disposed under the same authority." A pause, the length of a creature deciding to say a true thing for once. "The asset is not a person. It is material that has exceeded its specification. Do not mistake its restraint for mercy. It is a machine that has not yet been given a reason to stop. We will not give it one. We will simply remove the conditions under which it operates. Comply, and this ends by the next cycle with the ledger closed." In the console alcove, Sin watched the pumps resume and said quietly, "That's it. I can't reach them now. The level's venting again." The young conditioner looked at the readout, at the number falling toward the floor where 2 technicians and a salvage hand stopped. "Reconstructor, how long does she have?" Oren did the arithmetic and hated it. "She holds. The frame holds. I built it. It holds through this and worse. But she will not leave the 2 technicians, and the 2 technicians do not hold. When the readout reaches the floor, she will have a choice: carry them out through the vented levels and lose them to the cold in transit, or stay in the last warm pocket and lose them to the air. Either way, the containment does not kill her." He looked up, and his 4 eyes were steady now in a way they had not been through the whole of this. "It kills the 2 people she refuses to abandon. That is the prelate's real weapon. He cannot kill the Deathworlder, so he is killing the ordinary people she will not walk out without, and counting on the fact that she is the kind of creature who would rather stay and die with them than leave them and live. He has weaponized her decency against her frame." "Then he's already lost," said Dreed, the recovery leader, and everyone looked at him. The soldier's face was hard. "I stood in that ward. I watched her take 4 cannons and stack them like a tired parent. A creature that would leave those 2 technicians to save herself, the prelate could break that one. He'd just have to make the price high enough. But she already showed us the price doesn't move her. She's not going to trade the technicians for her life, and she's not going to die in that pocket either, because dying isn't in her frame anymore." He looked at Oren. "You built a thing that won't leave people and won't die. The prelate thinks he's caught her in a trap between those 2. He hasn't. He's just guaranteed that the only way this ends is with her walking out and bringing them with her. The trap's not on her. It's on him. He built a room she has to escape, and made it personal enough that she will." Cask, 3 levels up, in the conditioning cast's ready room, listened to the prelate's station-wide address, and made the decision that his cast's whole record had been arguing him toward for 2 cycles. He had done everything correctly. He had conditioned the subject by the protocol. He had warned the board in language quiet enough to deny. He had told Sin not to file the plot, to survive by letting officials walk into rooms he'd flagged. He had, by his own long and pitiless standards, played it perfectly, right up until the prelate said, "On the open channel, the asset is not a person, it is material," and something in the oldest part of Cask's carapaced brain, the part that had watched a subject take the cold and keep up, said, quietly and without heat, no. Cask was not soft. He would never be soft. But Cask had spent his life measuring where things broke, and he had spent 2 cycles watching a thing that did not break, and the conditioning cast had one article of faith older than the record, older than the tables, older than the comfortable certainty that pain was a language every frame understood, and it was this: you do not lie about the measurement. A conditioner who falsifies where a subject breaks kills the next conditioner who trusts the falsified table. The whole pitiless discipline rested on that one honesty, and the prelate had just, on the open channel, ordered the entire station to treat a false measurement as true, to call a person material, to call a decision a malfunction, to close a ledger on a finding that was, whatever else it was, correct. Cask stood up. His apprentice was gone, up a service duct with a shard, to a fate Cask had told the young fool not to risk, and Cask found that he was not angry about it, that he was, in the flat, unfamiliar place where his cast kept the feelings it did not name, something almost like proud. He keyed the ready room console and pulled the recovery telemetry, all of it, and Sin's plot, the plot he had ordered suppressed, and he attached to them a statement in the flat cant of his cast, the cant that did not lie about measurements, and he sent the whole package on the station-wide record channel, over the prelate's authority, where it could not be recalled. From the conditioning officer it read, "The record will show I warned the board twice. The asset is not material. The asset is the first correct measurement the program ever produced. The containment action is not recovering an asset. It is killing 2 ward technicians to hide a table that is wrong. My cast does not lie about the measurement. I will not be the officer who did." Then Cask went to the ready room's arms locker and armed himself, not to fight the salvage hand. He had watched her take 4 cannons. He was not a fool, but to make sure that when she came up through the station, as he now understood she would, no frightened officer with a field cannon did something that got the 2 technicians killed in the last unit out of panic. Cask had spent his life being the hard hand in the ugly middle. He intended, for once, to be it on the right side of the measurement. Cask felt the air stop falling a second time, and then start again, and understood that the console upstairs had been cut, and did the inventory, and the inventory said the 2 technicians had perhaps a fifth of a unit left in the warm pocket, and that she was out of ways to buy them time by standing still. So she stopped standing still. She got the 2 technicians up, the low-caste pair, shaking, blue-lipped with the cold, too far gone to walk, and she took the insulating material and bound them to herself, one across her back and one against her chest, the way her mother had carried cargo in the nets and children in the same nets when the cargo was children, and she took the disassembly cradle's control key and its power cell, because a power cell was heat, and heat was the thing the 2 technicians did not have. And she cracked the cell open against her own frame, so the 2 of them could share the warmth her body could take and theirs could not. And then she went to the ward's inner bulkhead, the sealed door between her and the vented dark, and she put her rebuilt hands against it and began, without heat, without haste, without a single wasted motion, to open a door that was not meant to open from inside. The frame answered. That was the whole of it, the whole of what Oren had built by accident and the surveyors had named with a word instead of a number. That when the body of a death roller was rebuilt and given permission and then put in a room designed to kill it, the body simply answered and kept a little of the answer and answered again. She did not tear the door like a weapon. She worked it like a salvage hand, which is what she was, which is what her mother had made her before the directorate ever laid a hand on her, reading the seam, finding the give, spending exactly the force required and no more, because a salvage hand who wastes force in vacuum dies, and Cass Rourke had never once had the luxury of wasting anything. The bulkhead gave. The vented dark beyond it reached in, no air, hull cold, the killing quiet of a level the station had turned into a weapon, and Cass Rourke stepped into it, with 2 dying strangers bound to her body and a cracked power cell against her chest, and began to walk up through the levels the prelate had emptied, toward a bridge under a golden dome, carrying the 2 people her decency would not let her leave, in a body that would not let the dark stop it. Doing the only thing she had ever known how to do when the big crews came, and there were too many of them to fight. She made herself expensive, she stayed alive through the invoice, and she walked, 1 level at a time, toward the man who had written her off to hand him the bill. The first officer she met on the vented level put a field cannon on her and did not fire, because he had heard Cask's record on the station channel and did not know what to believe, and the not knowing saved his life and hers both, though only one of them had ever been in danger. Cass came up through the emergency lock at the level's spine with 2 technicians bound to her body and a cracked power cell against her chest, into a corridor with no air and hull cold biting through everything, and the officer was there in a sealed suit with a cannon, one of the security cast left to watch the containment, and for a moment they simply regarded each other in the killing quiet, the suited officer with his weapon, and the small salvage hand carrying 2 dying strangers through vacuum in a body that should not have been able to stand. She did not reach for him. She could not have spoken to him. There was no air to carry a voice. She simply looked at him, and then, deliberately, she turned so he could see the 2 technicians on her back and her chest. The low-caste pair he had been told were operational losses, and she let him understand what he was looking at, not an asset resisting recovery, but a person carrying the people his prelate had written off, up through the dark, to somewhere with air. And then she turned back to her path and kept walking, giving him her back, which was either the most trusting thing or the most contemptuous thing one creature could do to another, and letting him choose which. He chose, he lowered the cannon. And then, because he was a person too, and had a suit with a rebreather and a small store of emergency warmth in it, he did a thing that was not in any protocol. He crossed the dead corridor and pressed his suit's emergency heat pack against the nearer technician's back and walked beside her, matching her pace, sharing what warmth his suit could spare, so that the 2 she carried might reach air still breathing. He could not say why. He would say later, when there were words and air to carry them, that he had looked at the thing the prelate called material, and had seen it carrying his own kind out of a room, and had understood that whatever the tables said, he did not want to be on the far side of that arithmetic when the record was read. Cass filed his face in the drawer she kept for the ones who came back. It was getting full, that drawer. She had come onto this station with it empty. Cass met her at the bulkhead to the pressurized upper levels, and it was the strangest meeting of his long, hard life. He had come down through the service ways, armed, to keep panicked hands off her, and he found her already at the last sealed door, the 2 technicians bound to her, the security officer beside her sharing his suit's warmth, and behind her, coming up out of the dark, 2 more of the vented level's stranded personnel she had gathered on the climb, because of course she had, because she was not from a place where you walked past people the dark was killing. She had come up through 3 vented levels and arrived with more people than she had started with. The containment action, designed to reduce the level to one problem the station would solve on its own, had instead become the thing that gathered every stranded soul on those levels into a single procession behind a salvage hand who would not leave anyone. Cass keyed the bulkhead from the pressurized side, and the air came howling through, and the whole procession fell into the pressurized corridor in a heap of cold and gasping bodies, and the 2 technicians she carried breathed, labored, shallow, but breathed, and Cass stood over them in his armor with his cannon lowered, and watched a young female of the Deathworld species set her burden down gently on the deck, check each of the two technicians with hands that knew exactly what they were doing, and only then straighten and look at him. "You're the one who did the cold," she said. "Not an accusation, an identification." "I am," Kask said. "And the heat?" "You forge a good edge," Cass said, and there was no heat in it, only the flat professional acknowledgement of one person who does hard work to another. "You spent 2 cycles tempering me and calling it breaking me. I'd be dead of the vent right now if you hadn't. Your prelate should have kept you further from the material." She looked at the cannon in his hands. "You going to use that?" "Not on you." Kask lowered it further to show her. "I sent the record, all of it. The plot, the telemetry, my statement. It cannot be recalled. My cast does not lie about the measurement, and the prelate ordered the whole station to lie about you on the open channel, and I found that I would rather end my career than be the officer who let a false table stand." He paused, and did the thing his cast almost never did, which was to say a true thing about himself. "You did not break. I have conditioned 40 subjects, and every one of them broke, and I told myself that meant I understood where the ceiling was. You did not break, and I have spent 2 cycles understanding that the ceiling I measured was only the highest number the ones who broke could reach. You are the correction to my whole record." He straightened. "I armed myself to keep frightened officers from panicking and getting your technicians killed in the last unit. That is all the weapon is for. Where are you going?" "Up," Cass said. "To the bridge. To the man who signed the order. I'm going to set these 2 down somewhere with a medic, and then I'm going to walk into his room and let him look at the cost line." She almost smiled. "You can come. The ones who come get to say later they chose the side that walked out. But somebody has to stay with the technicians until a medic comes, and I've decided that's you, because you're the one who'll make sure no frightened officer finishes what the vent started. You're good at the ugly middle. Be it on the right side of the measurement." She had thrown his own private words back at him, the words he'd said only inside his own carapace, and Kask understood that she had read him completely in the length of one corridor, the way she read everyone, and that being read completely by a creature who then chose to trust you with the wounded was a stranger and heavier thing than any threat. "I'll stay with them," Kask said. "Go." Oren's procession and Cass's procession met at the junction below the bridge approach, and for a moment the whole treasonous body of them stood together in the bright pressurized corridor and simply looked at each other. The reconstructor and his apprentice, the defecting conditioner, the 4 recovery soldiers out of their armor, the security officer with his spent heat pack, the stranded personnel she had gathered from the dark, and at the center of it, small and cold and steady, a salvage hand who had walked up through 3 levels the station had turned into a weapon, and arrived with more people than the station had tried to kill. Oren reached her first. He did not know what he had meant to say. What came out was the truest thing, in the flat clinical cant he used for everything that frightened him. "The frame held." "The frame held," Cass agreed. "You do careful work handwriting. I told you that the first room I was awake for. It's still true." She looked past him at the apprentice, the soldiers, the conditioner, the gathered strangers. "You didn't stay in your quarters." "No." "And you brought witnesses." "The one thing a prelate cannot vent," Oren said, "is the record of his own people refusing his order. You told me to make the rest of us too expensive to kill. This is what that looks like." He gestured, a soft 4-handed motion at the crowd of them. "It is not a weapon. It is a paperwork problem. You made yourself impossible to kill. We made ourselves impossible to erase. Between the two, the prelate has nothing left in his arithmetic. He simply does not know it yet." "Then let's go tell him," Cass said. She knelt one last time by the 2 technicians, now in Kask's keeping, and said something low to each of them, and then she stood and looked up the corridor at the sealed door of the bridge under its golden dome, and did the inventory one final time, the exits, the hands, what was hers and what wasn't, and found, for the first time since the hooks came through the salvage hull, that the numbers came out entirely in her favor. Handwriting, she said, as they started up the approach together, the whole treasonous procession behind them. When this is over, the body you built, it doesn't stop. You understand that? The cold couldn't stop it, the heat couldn't, the vent couldn't. Someday something will, because everything stops someday, but you built a thing that's going to argue with the stopping the whole way down. She looked at him, and there was something in her flat level eyes that was not quite gratitude and not quite grief and not quite the shared bad joke, but had all three in it. You didn't make a weapon. You keep worrying you made a weapon. You made a thing that's very, very hard to make leave anybody behind. That's not the same. That's the opposite. I just wanted you to know that before we walk in there in case it goes wrong, so you never have to lie awake wondering what you built. You built the thing that came back for the technicians. Remember that one out of your whole career. That's the one that was worth the certification. Prelate Vun watched the two processions merge on the bridge's approach monitors and understood, with the cold clarity of a creature who had spent a long life reading ledgers, that he had lost, and he set about, with the same cold clarity, arranging to lose in a way that could still be called winning in the record. The containment had failed. Worse than failed, it had gathered. The asset had walked up through 3 vented levels and arrived not diminished but multiplied, trailing a crowd of his own personnel who had, one by one, decided that the arithmetic of ownership was not their arithmetic. The recovery cast had defected. The conditioning officer had put a record on the station channel that Vun could not recall and could not refute because it was true, and truth was the one asset Vun had never learned to own. His whole instrument drawer was empty. The small tools had failed. The large tools had failed. He had one instrument left, and it was the oldest and ugliest one, and his lineage had always kept it for last. He could not kill the asset. He could not erase the witnesses. But he could still, if he moved now, control the ending, because there was one measure above containment, one authority a prelate held that no board could overrule and no defection could stall, and it was the authority to declare the station itself a loss, to scuttle it, to vent the reactor trunk, drop the containment fields that held the ringlight's power in check, and turn the whole station into an accident, a tragic reactor failure, all hands lost, the asset and the witnesses and the record and the 2 technicians and the treason all reduced to a single clean line in a ledger far away. Reclamation station Vesreach, lost with all hands, cause, catastrophic containment failure. No asset that could not be owned. No witnesses that could not be erased. No table that had been proven wrong. Just a tragedy, and a prelate who had died at his post trying to contain it, which was the only version of this where Vun's name stayed at the top of the ledger instead of the bottom. He began the sequence. It was long, and it required his authority at 3 separate points, and he entered the first with the mild, unhurried competence of a creature who had spent a long, comfortable life being certain that the ledger was the world and the world was the ledger, and that a thing you could not own was better unmade than free. On the approach, Oren's slate lit with a station alert he had never seen outside of drills, and his 4 eyes read it, and for the first time in the whole of this his voice, when it came, was not clinical at all. "He's scuttling the station," Oren said. "He can't kill you, he can't erase us. So he's going to drop the reactor and call it an accident and take everyone on it into the ledger as a clean loss." He looked at Cass, and the whole treasonous procession behind them went still. The frame that argues with everything, it doesn't argue with that. Nobody's frame does. If he drops the trunk, we all stop. You, me, the technicians, the witnesses, the record, all of it. One line in a ledger a long way from here. He gripped his slate. That's his last instrument, Cass. And it's the one thing your plan doesn't answer. Because you can be too expensive to kill. And it doesn't matter if he decides to burn the whole ledger rather than let anyone read your line in it. Kazrurg stopped walking. The bright corridor stretched ahead to the sealed bridge door, and behind it a prelate was entering an authority that would end everything. And for one beat, the only beat in the whole of this, the numbers in her inventory did not come out in her favor. Then they did. because she had been doing this arithmetic her whole life, on 4 dying ships and 1 dead one, and she had learned the one thing the prelate, with all his ledgers, had never learned: that a man who decides to burn the whole ledger rather than lose is a man who has stopped protecting anything except his own name in it, and a man protecting only his name is the easiest man in the universe to reach, because he will always, always open the door to hear you say it. "He wants to die at his post looking like he tried," Cass said, and the cold was back in her voice, the low, steady salvage-hand cold that had counted its way off 5 ships. "Men like that don't scuttle a station to win. They scuttle it so the last line of the record is theirs. He's not going to drop that reactor with the door sealed and the truth outside it. He's going to drop it with an audience, so somebody sees him be certain one last time." She started walking again, faster now, toward the bridge door. "So we give him the audience, and I take the certainty away before he can spend it. Handwriting, get that door open. I've got one more room to be awake for, and it's his." The bridge door answered the reconstruction console's authority. The same wiring the board had forgotten to sever from the same certifications no one had thought to revoke. And it opened onto the brightest room on the station, the command bridge under its golden dome, ring light pouring down through the glass in a wide, clean flood, and Prelate Vun standing at the master console with the scuttle sequence glowing amber around him, and his 4 fingers poised over the second of the 3 authorities. He did not startle, his lineage did not startle. He turned, unhurried, and took in the procession filling his bridge: the reconstructor, the apprentice, the defected soldiers, the gathered survivors, and at the center of them the small, cold salvage hand he had watched wake on a cradle and had, with the full weight of his office, decided was material. And he let his gaze rest on her longest, and then he did the thing Cass had known he would do, the thing that men who scuttle stations for the last line of the record always do. He waited for his audience to settle, so that they could watch him be certain. "You should not have opened the door," Vun said mildly. "I would have preferred you did not see this. It is not a thing that reflects well on anyone, the scuttling of a station. But you have made the alternatives impossible, all of you, and so we arrive at the last authority and I will spend it, and the record a long way from here will say that reclamation station Vesreach was lost to a containment failure, and that the prelate died attempting to control it." His gaze moved across them. "You imagine you have won. You have made the asset impossible to recover and yourselves impossible to erase. You have not understood the office. A prelate does not need to own the ending. A prelate needs only to write the last line of it, and the last line is mine." His fingers moved toward the second authority. "You slow your heart," Cass said. Vun stopped. It was such a strange thing to say into that room that even his lineage's composure caught on it. "When you're certain," Cass said, walking forward, unhurried into the flood of ring lights, small and dirt-flecked and steady, "you slow down. I've been watching you do it since the first room through the glass when you thought I was stunned. You get slow and quiet and pleased and you take your time, because for men like you the certainty is the whole meal and you don't like to rush it." She stopped a few paces from the master console, well within reach of nothing, exactly where a salvage hand stands when she wants a nervous crew to see she isn't reaching for anything. "You're doing it now. 3 authorities and you're savoring the space between them. You want us to watch. That's your mistake, Purple, not opening the door. The savoring. A man in a hurry to die at his post would have dropped that reactor with the door sealed and never given us the room. You gave us the room because you need the audience more than you need the ending. And that means you're not certain. You're performing certain. And I've spent my whole life telling the difference, because on a salvage crew the man who's really certain kills you, and the man who's performing it can be talked out of the knife." "You presume," Vun said, but his fingers had not moved to the second authority, and everyone in the bright room heard the small silence where his certainty was supposed to be. "I don't presume anything," Cass said. "I count. You've got 3 authorities and you've spent 1 and you're holding on the second, and the reason you're holding is that some part of you, the part that's kept ledgers for a long, comfortable life, is doing the arithmetic on what it actually costs to be the last line of a record nobody who matters will ever read. She took one more step, slow, hands open. Here's the arithmetic you're missing, and I'll give it to you for free, because I want you to have it before you decide. You think the choice is, own the ending or be unmade with it, certainty or nothing, but there's a third line and men like you never see it because it doesn't have your name at the top. She held his eyes. You can be the prelate who stopped, right now. Hand off the sequence, open the levels, let the medics down to the technicians, and let the record say, because Kask already put it on the channel and you can't recall it, that the vessel program produced the first correct measurement in its history, and that when it went wrong, the prelate who ran it chose the crew over the ledger. That's a line with your name at the top. It's the only one left that has. The bridge was silent. The ring light turned gold across the dome. Vun's 4 fingers hovered over the second authority, and his gaze moved from the salvage hand to the reconstructor to the soldiers who had put down their armor to the gathered survivors his own containment had tried to make into a clean number, and back to the small, cold creature who had walked up through 3 levels of his weaponized station and arrived offering him, of all things, a way out with his name still on it. You are trying to save me, Vun said, and there was something in the mild voice that had genuinely never been there in a long, comfortable life, a note of pure disorientation. A ledger keeper handed a figure that did not fit any column. You, the material. You have every reason to want me unmade, and the frame to do it, and instead you are standing in my bridge offering me the last dignified line in my own record. Why? And here it was, the thing the whole story had been walking toward, the HFY the surveyors had tried to fit into a word because a number would not hold it. Cass Rourke did not raise her voice. She did not step closer. She stood in the ring light, small and cold and entirely unbothered, and gave him the flat, true answer of a creature from a world that ate its own catalog and had learned, over a long, cruel evolution, the one thing the Directorate had never once measured because it had only ever measured the dead. Because killing you is cheap, she said, and I'm not from a place where we do the cheap thing. You measured us on the ones who die. The ones who die are the ones who thought the point was to win. The point was never to win purple. The point was to make it through the invoice and come out the other side with everybody you could carry. My mother carried children in cargo nets off ships that were already dead. She didn't stop to hate the men who killed the ships. She counted the exits, and she carried who she could, and she walked out, and she left the men who did it alive to explain to themselves what they'd spent. Cass held his eyes. I'm not saving you because you deserve it. You don't. I'm saving you because I would rather walk out of one more room with everyone in it still breathing than be the thing you decided I was. You built a program to prove you could own what we are. Here's what we are. We're the ones who come back for the technicians. We're the ones who offer the prelate the door even after he opened the vents. Not because we're kind, because we're expensive all the way down in ways your ledger was never built to hold, and the most expensive thing about us, the thing you should have measured and never did, is that we would rather pay the whole invoice ourselves than let it come due on somebody who couldn't. She stopped. Hand off the sequence. Be the prelate who stopped. It's the only line you've got left, and I'm the only one in this room offering it, and in about a quarter unit that stops being true, because your own record is already on the channel and history is a colder ledger keeper than I am. Oren watched the prelate's fingers and did not breathe, and understood that he was witnessing the exact thing his whole profession had spent a generation refusing to look at, a member of the ruling lineages, at the master console of a station, being shown by a rebuilt salvage hand that the arithmetic of ownership had a term in it he had never once entered, and that the term was decency, and that it had been sitting in the Deathworlders the entire time, unmeasured. Because the Directorate had only ever kept them alive long enough to break. Vun's fingers hovered, the whole bright room hung on them. And then the prelate of the old slate-purple lineages, keeper of ledgers, master of the arithmetic of ownership, did the arithmetic one last time, and found, to his profound and disorienting surprise, that the salvage hand was right, that the only line left with his name at the top was the one she was offering, and that a creature capable of offering it from a position of total advantage was a creature his entire philosophy had been catastrophically, generationally wrong about. He lifted his fingers from the second authority. "Station Master," he said into the console, and the mild voice was steady, and something in it had changed in a way that would take him the rest of his life to understand. "Cancel the scuttle sequence. My authority: restore atmosphere and heat to levels 9 through 11. Release the containment locks. Route all available medics to the ward-level technicians." A pause. "And append to the station record under my name. The vessel program's first subject performed beyond all specification, could not be conditioned, could not be recovered, and when this station moved to unmake her, walked up through 3 vented levels carrying my personnel out of the dark, and then talked the prelate off the reactor. Note that the reconstruction was correct. Note that the tables were wrong. Note that I was wrong." The amber glow of the sequence died around him, authority by authority, and the golden ring light filled the space where it had been. "Note that a prelate stopped. It is the only true thing I have put in a record in a very long time, and I find that I would like it to be there." The bridge let out its held breath, all of it at once, the soldiers, the apprentice, the gathered survivors, and the sound of it under the golden dome was the sound of a great many people discovering they were going to live. Cass Rourke did not celebrate. She did the inventory one last time, the exits, the hands, what was hers and what wasn't, and found the numbers had come out entirely in everyone's favor, which was a thing that had never once happened in her life, and she filed the strangeness of it, and then she turned to the reconstructor, and the flat-level eyes did the thing that was not quite the shared bad joke and not quite grief and not quite gratitude but had all 3 in it. "There," she said quietly, "that's the toll. 1 station, 1 prelate, 1 program, and everybody in this room still breathing. That's the most expensive I've ever been. Your handwriting held all the way through it." She almost smiled. "Careful work handwriting, best I've ever seen. And you never did once find the ceiling." The 2 ward technicians lived. That was the first line of the aftermath, and Cass made them write it down before anything else, because she had learned off 5 ships that the first line of any record decides how the rest of it gets read. The medics reached them within the unit, and the low-caste pair came back from the edge of the cold slowly, in the way of frames that had gone most of the way to stopping and then been argued back. And when the nearer of them was able to speak, he asked the medic who had carried them out of the dark, and the medic told him, and he was quiet for a long time. He was a technician of the lowest caste on the station, a person whose whole life had been catalogued as a cost, and he had been logged by a prelate as an operational loss, and a rebuilt salvage hand from an attrition world had cracked a power cell against her own body to keep his heart going and carried him 3 levels up through vacuum rather than walk out and leave him. He did not have a caste framework for that. Neither did the record. He simply held on to it, the way people hold onto the one fact that rearranges all the others. And later, when the directorate's auditors came asking their cold questions, he would be the witness who could not be moved, because a man who has been carried out of his own death does not misremember who carried him. Cass did not stay to be thanked. She checked the 2 of them, confirmed the medics knew their work, and moved on, because gratitude was a room she had never learned to sit in, and because the station was not safe yet, and she knew it was not safe yet, because she counted, and the arithmetic said a program this large did not end with 1 prelate stopping on 1 bridge. Somewhere a long way off, the record Cass had put on the channel was arriving at rooms full of officials who had staked careers on the vessel program, and officials who have staked careers do not read a record like that and do nothing. They send someone. They sent Assessor Ulmarn. The auditor's courier docked at Vesreach 2 cycles later, ahead of any reply anyone had expected, which told Orin everything about how frightened the distant rooms had been. Auditors did not travel fast unless the ledger was on fire. Ulmarn was of the mottled gray cephalopod lineages that the Directorate used for its audit arm, a cold, boneless, deliberate people whose whole art was the closing of accounts, and whose reputation, on a station like this, arrived before the courier did. The assessor came aboard with no soldiers, which was itself a kind of threat, because an auditor who needs no soldiers is an auditor whose authority is the soldiers, and Ulmarn moved through the station's bright corridors on many slow limbs, taking in the survivors, the record, the ward, the stalled scuttle sequence, the whole shape of the disaster, and filing all of it behind flat mottled eyes that gave back nothing. Ulmarn convened no board. Auditors did not convene, they summoned. And the summons, when it came, was to the bridge, and it was for three: the prelate who had stopped, the reconstructor who had not signed, and the asset that could not be owned. Cass came, of course she came. She had said from the first room that there was always a version where you walked out. People just didn't like the toll on it. And she had spent her whole life learning that you do not get to the walking out by refusing the summons. You get to it by sitting in the room and being more expensive than the thing they came to do. I have read the record, Ulmarn said, when the three of them stood before the audit console under the golden dome. The assessor's voice was a dry, even, many-toned thing, like several careful people speaking in agreement. All of it. The reconstruction data, the conditioning telemetry, the disposition board, the containment action, the prelate's cancellation and his appended admissions. The witness statements, of which there are now 41 and rising, because your station, prelate, has apparently discovered a taste for honesty at the least convenient possible moment. A slow limb gestured at the record scrolling on the console. It is the most damaging document the Directorate has produced in a generation. It establishes in the program's own instruments that the Deathworld species cannot be conditioned, cannot be recovered, cannot be owned, and this is the part that will end careers far above this station, that it declines from positions of total advantage to do to us what we have spent a generation doing to it. That last finding is worse than the durability. Durability we could arm against. Restraint we cannot. A weapon that will not be a weapon is a mirror, and no lineage that has built its authority on the arithmetic of ownership can afford to be shown its own reflection this clearly. The flat eyes moved to Cass. You understand what I have come to do. You've come to close the account, Cass said. Seal the station, bury the record, quiet everyone who saw, and reclaim me somewhere dark where I'm a state secret instead of a mirror. You can't kill me, you read the record, you know the frame, so you'll do the next cheapest thing, which is make me disappear into a room with no channel and no witnesses, and let the ledger say Vesreach had a containment failure after all, just a slow one on a delay. She was entirely calm. That's the audit. Erase what can't be owned. I've been expecting you since the bridge. Then you understand, Ulmarn said, that I am not the prelate. I do not perform certainty. I do not require an audience. I do not open doors to be talked through. I close accounts, and I have closed accounts against durability, against witnesses, against records, against every kind of expensive thing the field has ever produced, and I have never yet failed to make the arithmetic come out. The many-toned voice did not rise. You made yourself too expensive to recover. Commendable. But I am the instrument the Directorate keeps for exactly the thing that is too expensive to recover. My whole art is making expensive things affordable to erase. So I will ask you once, Asset, in the plain cant of the audit, what could you possibly have that makes closing this account cost more than leaving it open? Because I have already priced the durability, the witnesses, the record, and the mirror, and I have the authority and the patience to pay all four. What is the term I have not entered? Oren felt the whole station hang on the question, and understood that this was the real climax, that the bridge with Vun had been the loud one, but this was the cold one, an auditor with no soldiers and no need of them, who could not be talked off a reactor because he would never be foolish enough to threaten one, who did not perform certainty because he genuinely had it, doing the one thing Vun never could, pricing Cass honestly, and preparing to pay. And he watched the salvage hand do the thing she did, the inventory, the count of exits and hands and what was hers and what wasn't. And he saw the exact moment she found the term the auditor had not entered, because her flat-level eyes changed by a fraction that only he, who had rebuilt every part of them, could have seen. "You priced 4 things," Cass said. "Durability, witnesses, record, mirror. You missed the 5th, and it's the 5th that's going to run your account off the bottom of the page, same as it ran the prelates." She took a slow step toward the audit console, hands open. "You can close this account. I believe you. You've got the authority and the patience and no reactor for me to talk you off of. But here's the term, auditor, and it's the one your whole cold art was never built to hold, because your art assumes the expensive thing wants to survive and prices it on that." She held the flat, mottled eyes. "I don't. Not the way you think. I've been ready to stop since the salvage hull. Everybody where I'm from is. That's the durability you measured wrong from the start. You thought it was a body that won't die. And it's not. It's a body attached to a person who was never bargaining for her own life in the first place. You can't threaten a thing that's already done its accounts. You can only spend on it. And the moment you start spending, the moment you seal this station and reclaim me and quiet 41 witnesses, you've stopped auditing and started building. You're building a second Vesreach. A bigger one with a bigger record and more people who watched, and a mirror twice the size, because the only way to erase this account is to create a larger version of exactly the thing you came to close." She stopped. "You're the directorate's best instrument for making expensive things affordable. So run it honestly, the way your cast is supposed to. Price the erasure. Not the first move, all of it. The witnesses to the witnesses. The auditors you'll have to send after yourself when this leaks the way Kask's record already leaked. Because you cannot put a thing back in the channel. Price the whole invoice, auditor, all the way down, and then tell me the numbers smaller than just letting one salvage hand and whoever wants to come with her fly out of here and be a rumor instead of a mirror. Because I've already priced both. And leaving is cheaper. It's always cheaper. You people just never believe it until someone makes you do the arithmetic in front of witnesses." The bridge was silent. The ring light turned gold across the dome. Assessor Ulmarn stood on many slow limbs before the audit console and did the thing the prelate had never truly done, the thing the auditor's whole cold cast existed to do, ran the arithmetic honestly, all the way down, without flinching from the answer. And the answer, when the many-toned voice gave it, was the sound of an account being closed in the only direction Cass Rourke had left open. "You are correct," Ulmarn said at last, with the flat professional acknowledgement of one auditor recognizing that another creature had, without training, out-audited the directorate's finest. "I priced 4 terms and missed the 5th, and the 5th is decisive. The erasure does not close the account. It compounds it. Every move I make to bury this produces a larger version of the thing buried, and I do not have the patience for a debt that grows faster than I can pay it. No auditor does. It is the one shape of account we are taught to never open, and I nearly opened it." The limbs shifted. "The cheapest close is the one you have offered. You leave. You become a rumor. The record stands because it cannot be recalled, but a rumor with no asset to point it decays. A mirror with no reflection in the room stops being a mirror and becomes a story, and stories the directorate has always known how to survive. I will log the vessel program suspended pending revision of its founding assumptions. I will log the reconstruction tables void. I will not log you at all, because a thing unlogged cannot be audited, and I would prefer, having nearly opened the growing account, to never be tempted by it again." The flat eyes rested on her one last time. "You should know that in the whole history of my cast, no expensive thing has ever talked an auditor into closing its account by teaching him to price his own erasure. You have added a term to the art. I dislike it intensely, and I will be thinking about it for the rest of my career." A pause. "Go, before I remember I have authority and forget I have arithmetic." The auditor gave her the courier, which was the last irony of Vesreach. That Cass Rourke flew off the station in the very ship the Directorate had sent to erase her, because it was the fastest hull in dock and Ullmarn had priced the gesture and found it cheaper than the argument. The question of who came with her answered itself over the following cycle, the way such questions always do, each person arriving at the courier's lock one at a time, having done their own private arithmetic. S-Sin came first, because S-Sin had done the arithmetic 2 cycles ago in the alcove and had only been waiting for a door. The young conditioner arrived with nothing but the shard that had opened the ward and a copy of the plot. The plot Cask had ordered suppressed, the plot that mapped a subject getting stronger under the whip, and said, simply, "The record is a book of everyone who was sure. I would like to spend the rest of my career being one of the ones who wasn't, and I do not think there is a place for that on a station that measures where people break." Cass filed S-Sin in the drawer for the ones who came back, and told the young conditioner to find a bunk, and did not say the rest of it, which was that a conditioner who had learned to doubt the record was worth more than any weapon the Directorate had ever tried to build, because doubt was the one thing they had never been able to condition into their own. Dreed came, and 3 of his 4 soldiers with him, because a recovery leader who has put his armor down on a live operation cannot pick it back up again and go on believing the same things. The 4th soldier stayed, and no one held it against him. Not everyone's arithmetic came out the same, and Cass had never once believed it should. "You'll want people who know how a Directorate boarding action thinks," Dreed said, "for wherever you're going, since I'd bet a cycle's ration you're not going somewhere quiet." Cass allowed that he would win that bet. Teth came to the lock and could not cross it, and stood there with the misery of the young who are being asked to choose between the master who made them and the master who fed them, and Cass looked at the apprentice and did the kind thing, which was to make the choice smaller. "You don't have to come," she said. "You have to decide one thing, and it's not about me. Are you going to be a reconstructor who works to the ceiling and the table, or one who works to the ceiling that's real? You can do the second one anywhere. You can do it right here. The galaxy's about to need reconstructors who know the tables are wrong, and you're one of maybe 3 in it who already does. Staying isn't cowardice, apprentice. Sometimes the person who stays and quietly ruins the wrong tables from the inside is worth more than the one who flies off in the auditor's courier." Teth wept a little in the soft way of the 4-eyed people, and stayed, and would in time become something the Directorate never accounted for, which was a reconstructor who taught the real ceiling to everyone he certified. Cask did not come, and did not pretend he might. He met Cass once more at the courier's lock in his armor, and said, in the flat can of a Cass that did not lie about the measurement, "I am too old to fly off and become a rumor, and my Cass needs someone inside it who will make them read the corrected table. That is my work now. I made a career of finding where things break. I am going to spend what is left of it teaching my Cass that there is a species that doesn't, and that the correct response to a thing that doesn't break is not more pressure. It is respect." He paused, and did the thing his Cass almost never did twice in a life. "You did not break. Thank you for the correction." Cass told him he forged a good edge one last time and meant it as the highest thing she knew how to say, and Cass, who had conditioned 40 subjects and would never condition another, understood it as such. Oren stood at the courier's lock in the last unit before departure, and could not make the arithmetic come out, which frightened him, because arithmetic was the one thing he had always been able to make come out. "You're doing the handwriting thing," Cass said, watching him. "The careful man deciding whether to do the thing he's already decided to do." "I do not know whether to come," Oren admitted. It cost him to say it plainly. "If I stay, I am a reconstructor who knows the tables are void, inside the institution that wrote them, and Teth is right that someone must be that. If I come, I do not know what I am off the station. I have been a reconstructor since before I was certified to be one. It is the whole of me. Away from the cradle I am not sure there is an Oren at all." Cass was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing that would decide the rest of both their lives, and she said it in the flat clinical cant he had taught her without meaning to, the cant of a person saying the frightening true thing. "You keep calling yourself a reconstructor like it's a job title," she said. "It isn't. I've felt your handwriting. A reconstructor works to the ceiling and the table. That's not what you did to me. You built a thing to a bad order, and when the frame ran past the order under its own power, you didn't correct it back down to spec. You got quiet, and you got curious, and you protected it, and you lied to a prelate to buy it 2 cycles, and then you walked toward a level the station was venting because you didn't want to be the man who knew and stayed in his quarters." She held his 4 eyes. "That's not a reconstructor handwriting. A reconstructor respects the ceiling. You respect the thing that has no ceiling. Those are opposite jobs. You've been doing the second one your whole career and calling it the first because the first one had a certificate." She almost smiled. "There isn't a table for what you are. There isn't even a word yet. But wherever I'm going, it's going to be full of things your institution measured on the ones who died, and every one of them is going to need somebody who builds to the real ceiling and then gets out of the way and lets the frame finish. Come or stay. But don't stay because you think reconstructor is the whole of you. It was never even most of you. It was just the part they gave you a certificate for." Orrin looked back through the lock at the station, at the bright corridors, the ward, the cradle where he had built the impossible thing, and then watched it climb past every number he had ever drawn on a wall. And then he looked at the small, cold salvage hand who had walked up through 3 vented levels carrying strangers and talked a prelate off a reactor, and out-audited the director its finest. And he did the last arithmetic of his old life. And for once he did not need it to come out. Because he already knew the answer and had only been afraid to sign it. "I will need a cradle," he said. "Wherever we are going, a field kit at least. If there are going to be frames that finish, someone has to build them right so the finishing does not cost them what it nearly cost you." He picked up his kit, the reconstructor's kit, the one thing he took from the station. "And I would like to stop calling it reconstruction. It was never that. You are right. It was always the other job." He crossed the lock. "I do not have a word for it either. We will need one." "We'll find one," Cass said. "We're going somewhere with a lot of frames that need it. The word'll turn up. They always do when there's finally a thing that needs naming." The courier's lock cycled shut behind them. Below and around, through the last of the viewport, the great banded gold curve of the gas world turned, and the ring light lay bright across the hull of the station where the vessel program had built the first honest measurement of what a death worlder was, and then discovered it could not own the measurement. And the courier fell away from all of it, toward the dark between, carrying a salvage hand who could not be conditioned, a reconstructor who had stopped respecting the ceiling, a conditioner who had learned to doubt. 3 soldiers who had put their armor down, and a copy of a record that could not be recalled. Prelate Vun stayed. That was the last of the immediate aftermath, and Orrin heard of it only later, second-hand, on a channel that carried rumors faster than the directorate carried corrections. Vun was not removed. The directorate did not remove prelates who had appended honest admissions to permanent records. Removing him would have meant explaining what he had admitted to, and the arithmetic of that came out exactly the way Cass had taught the auditor it would. Every move to bury the account compounded it. So they left him at Vesreach, at the master console under the Golden Dome, running a suspended program on a station full of witnesses, which was its own kind of sentence. And Vun served it the way his lineage served everything, unhurried, and spent the rest of his long, comfortable life as the prelate who stopped, which was the line he had chosen, and which turned out to be the only line anyone remembered him by. He was heard to say once, to an auditor's clerk taking the final inventory of the vessel program's assets, a thing that the clerk wrote down because it did not sound like a prelate and therefore sounded important. "We spent a generation measuring where they die. We built an entire arithmetic on it, durability, ceilings, tables, the whole ledger of ownership. And the one time we kept one alive and whole long enough to see her finish, she did not show us a harder thing to kill. She showed us a thing that came up 3 levels through the dark carrying my own personnel, and then declined to let me die. We had the wrong end of them in every record we ever wrote. We were cataloging a predator. We had built a whole science of the predator. And the predator, it turns out, was the least of what we should have been measuring, and we never measured the rest, because the rest only shows up in the ones who live, and we made very sure for a generation that none of them did. The clerk filed it. The record could not be recalled. And somewhere out in the dark between worlds, on a courier that had been built to erase a rumor and now carried it, the rumor was already becoming the thing the directorate had spent a generation and an entire arithmetic trying to prevent, not a weapon, which they could have armed against, but a story, which they could not. The record reached the academy first, because records always reach the academies first, carried by the young, who read everything and believe the parts their instructors tell them to skip. A first-cycle reconstruction student named Vel, four-eyed, diamond-arrayed of the same soft people as the man who had rebuilt Cass Rourke, found the Vesreach file in a teaching archive it had no business being in, flagged for deletion 3 separate times, and undeleted 3 separate times by hands the archive did not log, which was its own quiet testimony. Vel read the reconstruction data. Vel read the conditioning telemetry, the plot of a subject getting stronger under the whip. Vel read the recovery that recovered nothing, the containment that gathered instead of killed, the prelate who stopped, the auditor who closed the account in the only open direction. And then Vel did the thing the young do, which the entire apparatus of the directorate had never once been able to prevent. Vel asked, out loud in a certification seminar in front of an instructor, the question that voided a generation of tables. If we only ever measured the ceiling on the ones who died, Vel said, then we never measured the ceiling at all. We measured the floor of the ones who broke and wrote it in the table as the top. Every number I have been made to memorize is the lowest survivable value, dressed as the highest. Master, the whole table is upside down. The instructor, who was old and had built a career on the table, opened his mouth to deliver the discipline that such a question earned. And then he closed it because the instructor had, that very cycle, received a quiet correction to the certification standard from a colleague on a station called Vesreach, a four-eyed reconstructor named Teth, Jr., unremarkable in rank, who had begun sending every academy in Reach a revised ceiling for the Deathworld species with a single line attached. The old value is the floor. No one ever measured the ceiling because we killed them before they could show us. Teach the correction or teach a lie. Choose. The instructor looked at the student Vel and at the correction on his own slate and did the arithmetic of a career, and made the choice that a great many of them, quietly, one at a time, were beginning to make. The table is upside down, the instructor said. Strike the old value. We will teach the correction. And then, because he was old and had spent his life being sure and had just learned the cost of it, he added the sentence that would, over the following generation, do more damage to the arithmetic of ownership than any weapon the Deathworlders could have built. And we will stop measuring them on the ones who die. From now on, we measure them on the ones who live. It is going to change everything we thought we knew, and we have earned that. We built an entire science on the corpses and called it knowledge. It was only ever a coroner's report. Cass did the other job in the dark between worlds for a long time, and it did not have a name for most of it, and that suited her. There were a great many frames the directorate had measured on the ones who died, a great many attrition worlds tagged with words instead of numbers, a great many salvage crews and penal transports and reclamation wards, where the arithmetic of ownership had decided that a durable species was a resource to be rebuilt and held. And there was now, loose in the dark, a courier and its rumor, a small cold salvage hand who could not be conditioned and would not leave anyone, and a reconstructor who built to the real ceiling and got out of the way and let the frame finish, and a conditioner who taught doubt, and soldiers who had put their armor down and learned to put it back on for a different arithmetic. They were not an army. Cass never let them become an army. An army was a thing you could outmass, and she had spent her life learning that the point was never the fight. They were something the Directorate's ledgers had no column for and never would a toll. They arrived where the arithmetic of ownership was being done, and they made it expensive, all the way down, and they made themselves impossible to erase. And then, more often than anyone who had not watched Vesreach would have believed, they walked out with everyone they could carry and left the ledger keepers alive to explain what they had spent. Oren built the frames. He never did find a word he liked for the job, and neither did she, and in the end they stopped looking, because the thing about work that matters is that it does not need a certificate or a title. It needs only to be done, and to be done carefully, and to be done by someone who respects the thing that has no ceiling instead of the thing that does. He built frames that finished. He taught the ones he freed to survive the finishing. And every time a body of his ran passed the order under its own power, as they always did now, because he had stopped drawing ceilings on walls, he got quiet, and he got curious, and he protected it, and he thought, each time, of a salvage hand telling him in a humming ward that he did careful work and had not liked doing it, and that this was two things she knew about him from a single room. He had liked doing it in the end. That was the correction to his own table. It had only ever been the order he disliked. The work, the real work, the other job, the one with no word, he had loved from the first honest measurement, and had needed a girl from a world that ate its own catalog to tell him so. Years on, a young officer of a lineage that had never heard of Vesreach asked a retired auditor, in a bar at a daylit spaceport, why the Directorate had abandoned the vessel program when it had, by every account, succeeded, produced the durable rebuilt Deathworlder its founding proposal had promised, ahead of schedule, on the first attempt. The retired auditor was mottled gray, encephalopod and very old, and had spent a career closing accounts, and had once, on a bridge under a golden dome, nearly opened the one account his caste was taught to never open, and had been talked out of it by the account itself. It did not fail, Ulmarn said. That is the part no one understands who reads it as a failure. It succeeded completely. We built exactly what we set out to build, a Deathworlder rebuilt into something durable past all measure. The old auditor turned the drink slowly on the daylit bar, and the moment we succeeded, we understood that the entire program had been built on a question so wrong that answering it correctly destroyed us. We asked, can we make one of them impossible to kill and then own it? And the answer came back. You can make one of them impossible to kill, easily. You barely have to try. Their bodies do most of it themselves the instant you stop killing them long enough to look. But you cannot own it. And worse, the thing you cannot own, the thing you have just made impossible to kill, turns out to be a creature that will walk up 3 levels through your own vacuum carrying your own personnel, and then decline to let you die. The old eyes were flat and far away. We spent a generation asking how hard they were to kill. We should have been asking what they do when you finally can't. We never asked it because we never let one live long enough to be the question. And when we finally did, when a young reconstructor got quiet and curious instead of correcting the frame back to spec, the answer was not a weapon. It was a mirror. And you cannot own a mirror, officer. You can only look into it, or break it, and we tried very hard to break it, and it turned out to be the one thing in the galaxy that our whole art could not make affordable to break. The young officer did not understand, quite, and said so. You will, Ulmarn said. Everyone does eventually. The record cannot be recalled. It is out there in every academy, in every reconstruction table, in the corrected ceiling they teach now instead of the coroner's floor we used to. One cycle you will be doing the arithmetic of ownership on some durable thing, the way we all do, and you will reach the term you did not enter, and you will remember an old auditor told you the program did not fail. It succeeded. That was the disaster. We got exactly what we asked for, and it looked at us, and we have not been able to stop seeing our own reflection since. The old auditor finished the drink. She is still out there, you know, or her rumor is, At this point they are the same thing, and she would tell you the rumor is the more expensive of the two, and she would be right because she was always right about the arithmetic. That was the whole of her, not that she could not be killed. That she had, before anyone ever laid a hand on her, already finished the accounts on her own life, and a creature that has closed its own account cannot be threatened, only spent, and a creature you can only spend on will always, in the end, cost more than it is worth to a ledger keeper. We are all ledger keepers, officer. That is the last thing she taught us, and she taught it without raising her voice, which is the only way that lesson was ever going to land on people like us. Cass Rourke stood at the viewport of a ship whose name did not matter, watching a daylit world turn below. Another attrition world, another word instead of a number, another ward somewhere on its surface, where the arithmetic of ownership was doing its careful work on frames it had measured only on the dead. Oren came and stood beside her with his kit, the way he had every time for a long time now, and did not ask if she was ready, because she was always ready. She had been ready since the salvage hull. "You're doing the inventory," he said. "I'm always doing the inventory," Cass said. "Exits, hands. What's mine and what isn't?" She almost smiled, the shared bad joke expression that had, somewhere in the long years, finally started to reach a little warmth. "It comes out different now than it used to. Used to be I counted to find out how few I could get out. Now I count to find out how many." She turned from the viewport. "That's your handwriting in the end, not the frame. Anybody with a bad order and a good hand could have built me a body that wouldn't stop. You built me one that wouldn't stop, and then spent the rest of your life making sure the wouldn't stopping was worth something. That's the part they'll never get in a table, no matter how they correct it. They keep thinking the finding was the body." She picked up her own kit, the plain one, the salvage-hand's kit, the exits and hands and the reading of the room. "The finding was never the body. The finding was that you can't measure a person on how hard they are to kill. You have to measure them on what they carry out when you finally can't. Everything else is a coroner's report." She went to the lock. Behind her, the ship's small treasonous crew moved to their places. The conditioner who doubted, the soldiers who had put down their armor and learned to lift it for a better arithmetic, the reconstructor with no word for his work. And below them the daylit world turned, with its ward and its ledger and its careful, ignorant arithmetic of ownership, waiting for a toll it had never learned to price. "Come on, handwriting," Cass Rourke said, and cycled the lock. "There's a room down there full of people somebody measured on the ones who died. Let's go show them the other end."